and welcome to the Oshkosh Area School District Board of Education special meeting for Tuesday, January 19th, 2021. Has this meeting been properly noticed?
Yes, it has.
Please call the roll.
Heschel.
Aye.
Szilagyi.
Here.
Here. Carlin.
Here.
Evans.
Here.
Garner.
Here.
Herzog.
Here.
Olmsted.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Our next order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand, and Dr. Cartwright will lead us tonight.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. This special meeting was called in order to address a workshop item that we felt deserved its proper attention, and that would be a matrix review. So joining us this evening are the executive team and school administrators. Due to social distancing and the relatively small size of this space, we have a limited number of principals in the central office here in the room, but we also have an overflow room where I believe they can watch on camera and may join us if need be. So with that, let's move on to the workshop item.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. We're here to talk with you about returning to 5-day-a-week in-person learning. And in true teaching fashion, we usually like to kind of go through what the presentation is going to cover before we kick in so you can see what we're going to be discussing today. This is based upon the board request that we review the instructional model matrix and how we would safely return to in-person learning 5 days a week as soon as possible. So we're going to review the current matrix. We're going to look at some of the student impact data that will obviously influence your decision. And then I'm going to go through the 4 different options that we have. We'll talk a little bit about navigating Model 2, and that's where we'll be getting some principal perspectives on some challenges and solutions at both the pre-K 5 level as well as the secondary 6 through 12 level. And lastly, we'll talk about the central office administrative recommendation and then open it up for any questions that you may have. Obviously, you can interrupt us with any questions that you have throughout the presentation. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Kamer, who is going to talk about the existing matrix.
Thank you and good evening, everybody. Before we get into the options, we just wanted to provide a brief overview of the matrix. I know this was something that was covered in depth during the board meeting last week, but again, we just wanted to provide an overview to serve as a point of reference for anybody who isn't familiar with the matrix. So when we created the matrix, the goal was to really create a tool that we could use to help make decisions that is not only data-based, but provides some level of predictability to our students, our staff, and their families. So this is what we came up with, and it's really based on the presumption that the safest time for our students to return to school 5 days per week is when community spread is under control. So the main indicator that you see at the top really focuses in on the reports that are put out on a weekly basis from the health department that look at the case rate and the burden rate for local school districts in our county. So when you look at each of those levels, you'll see at the very top at the red level, the burden rate. It doesn't include a burden rate, actually. The red level relates to virtual instruction. And in order for us to go back to virtual, really we would need to be mandated or advised to go virtual by a state or local entity. Where we start to see the burden rates is really with Model 3. And the burden rates on the left-hand side are listed critically high, very high, and high. And those are related back to individual case rates for the burden or for the number of positive cases in our geographical district boundary area. So in order for us to be or remain in level 3, we would need to see consistently a burden rate in one of those areas. Now, for us to transition to Model 2 or lower, we would need a burden rate that is moderately high or moderate. In order to create stability, we wanted to look at 3 data points or 3 weekly reports that would consistently show us at a particular burden rate before we would make a change. We didn't want to be bouncing all over the place, if the data was, varying from week to week. At the bottom of the chart, you'll see secondary indicators, and those are used to help make decisions at the local levels. So, for instance, staffing availability is one of the secondary indicators, the number of positive cases or the number of quarantines at a school or in a classroom, and then finally the grade level burden status, where we look at the case rate to calculate the burden status for grade levels K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12. And for that, we would use the same thresholds that we use at the top for our main indicator. And again, with those secondary indicators, we can make changes or adjustments to the instructional model we're in based on whether or not we have enough staff to run a particular classroom or a school building, or if there are a significant number of cases or quarantines within a building. That's when we would consider making changes at those individual levels as well.
At this point, I would invite Julie Conrad to come up and provide some information that she's pulled together in terms of student impact data. Actually, I'll advance this thing.
Sounds good. So when we're looking at impact, there's been many requests for data around the following indicators. District-wide attendance rate, the login rate, I'll talk more about that at the secondary level, and the percent of students with 1 or more failing grades for the 5, 10, or 15-week progress report. It was asked, and we are going to be prepared to look at semester grades, but the semester grading window and report card window hasn't even closed yet, so we don't have that information available. One other thing I would like to point out is when it comes to attendance rate, there was some talk about truancy. Given our environment and given that we were in safer at home orders from March, truancy doesn't really apply. Truancy is a state statute definition. And so when we start looking at engagement, we really look at the attendance rate, or it's been flipped to chronic absenteeism. How much school is a student missing, or how many instructional minutes that is a student missing? Whether it's excused, unexcused, for whatever reason, what is that? So attendance rate is what we're going to take a look at here instead of truancy rate. So starting with that, here is the attendance rate district-wide across 2016, 17, 17, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20. And then when you're looking at 2021, you're going, wait a minute, the attendance rate is 98.7%. That can't be based on everything that we're talking about. But keep in mind that when you're in a virtual environment, the way that you look at attendance from like either virtual schools, etc., is based on login rate and a student participating in the learning management system. That is what like virtual schools, our E-Academy, other virtual schools across the state look at it from like a participation rate versus actual attendance. But that is our attendance rate through January 15th or through Friday. And I can tell you that when we look at it by month, our attendance rate is slightly lower in September when we were in hybrid. And even in the first month here in January, we're a little bit lower. We're sitting right at about 95% for the month of January so far. Okay. So then we go into login rate. How are students actually engaging into the environment? And when we say login rate here, we're talking about they're going into our learning management system, Canvas, or in the case of E-Academy, they're going into the Buzz learning management system and they're logging in. This is not about how much coursework have they completed, how much time have you spent in there, etc. Because once again, when you're in a virtual environment, students may be logging in and doing, that's the flexibility of a virtual environment, but they may be logging in later at night, early in the morning, or at different types of days. So up here you can see we did a dipstick of the login rate at particular times. You can see up here we have from April in May, so in the spring when we were safer at home. and then our login rate in October, and then our last dipstick that we did in December when it came to login rate. And so you can see from a district level where the overall login rate was in December was at 93.3%. And you may notice up there that Merrill Middle School has an NA. When you pull the login rate for a particular day, it's a snapshot in time, and Merrill just didn't happen to pull in our report that day, and so that's why the NA up there. We can't go back in time and pull it on that particular date, but overall, that's where we are with that, with login rates. Going on to the next slide, when we're talking about progress report trends. Up here, this is through the last 3 school years for first semester. This is complete data because for this first semester, progress report 3 was in December, so that is current data. But this is the percent of students with 1 or more failing grades at our progress report time for secondary. Secondary reports at 5, 10, and 15 weeks. Is where they're reported. And you can see the trend for high school and for middle school. And as expected, and as you know, and as you've heard, our failure rate is absolutely up at the progress report time. I am going to tell you this, though, that progress reports, once again, are a dipstick, right? And so at that point in time, a student may have been missing an assessment, like a test, etc. And so those rates usually are cut in a third or cut in a half by the time we get to the actual report card time. That tends to be the trend. And that's what we have for data.
Any questions about that data for Julie?
Yeah, Julie, when will the semester grades be final then?
Not till next week, because the teachers have until midnight tonight to post their grades.
Right, okay.
Then we have to go through and make sure everything's been submitted, everything's the way it needs to be, and then we run on the back end the report cards and GPA calculations, etc. So that won't be till next week.
Okay, and is the only thing you're going to be looking at is the Fs, or are you going to be looking at GPAs and all that other information, or just?
We're going to be looking at trend in GPA,
Okay,
and then we're going to be looking at the percent of students with 1 or more Fs.
thank you.
I just have a question. The login rate is reported by school,
Mm-hmm.
and the progress reports are reported out by grade level bands, high school and middle school. Is it possible to break those down by school as well?
We have those broken down by school, but for this district-wide report, we felt that we wanted to bring it up to the district level to look across the district to see where the percentages are.
Thank
But
you.
absolutely do we look and track by school, yes.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mhm.
So what are the options? What are the various options? And we've talked about some of those at the last board meeting, so we've tried to pull these together as best we can. The first option was discussed regarding changing the matrix and simply taking the high burden level out of the yellow area and pushing it down into the green area. The issue with that is every time we change the matrix like that, it looks somewhat arbitrary, and that can become confusing for people and become an issue. It's also heavily reliant upon the community spread data to impact every single school in the district. So it's not very granular, it's not very targeted. And so that option was not one that we administratively would recommend doing. And that was pretty universal at the executive team when we started talking about this. The second option was to create a brand new matrix that would be based solely on COVID-19 cases and quarantines within the schools as reported on our dashboard, and stop using the OASD boundary burden rate. We can go ahead and do something like that, and it would kind of look like this. And what this would do is, based upon whatever percent of count, this would be very granular, because you would be able to look at a given school or a given grade level band, and you'd be able to say, hey, our counts are at X percent, therefore we should be doing this or that. The problem with this is it can also become very disruptive, and it doesn't give families a lot of ability to count on school being in session, and we could be bouncing things up. So you can actually get almost too granular. So this is sort of, the whole Goldilocks thing. This bed was too hard, this bed was too soft. This is kind of that next step for us. This one is very granular, but can also, be very disruptive as well. The third one, this is the one that the administrative team recommended, was moving beyond the matrix. And that would be to stop using the matrix, transition the decision-making to logistics for a return, and for all students pre-K-12 on or after February 8th. And a lot of that date is going to be dependent upon when the board would make a choice. Because there has to be a set runway. You're going to hear that from the other groups in terms of having a runway to be able to make some changes and get ready to go when we move from a Model 3 to Model 2, and that's why that date was picked. We're realizing in option 3 that there are trade-offs in any decision. That's why we presented the student impact data. Being in Model 3 or Model 4 or Model 2 for that matter has an impact on our kids. And so there's trade-offs here, and we realize that. We'd use a similar decision-making process. We would still use data, but that data would be granular in terms of number of students and staff members that are COVID-19 positive, or number of students and staff members having to quarantine. So we would still be pulling that data. We'd look at staffing capabilities. There might be an instance where we have enough staff out that we need to transition a school from Model 2 back to a Model 3 or even potentially a Model 4 based upon those staffing capabilities. So we would still have the ability to do that. It would use consultation with health department and our school nurses. So this is sort of option 2 plus is I guess what I would call it.
So Dave, what is the difference between option 2 and option 3?
Yeah.
Like, well, can you explain like what the difference between those two options are?
You wanna try
So
that
this one is
Okay.
transition to making logistics for return. Isn't that kind of the same thing that you're looking at option 2?
So the big difference between 2 and 3 is option 2 would require thresholds. So once we reach a certain point in terms of the number of students who have positive cases or quarantines, that would trigger us to do something.
For that
Whether it be
school.
go to Model 3, Model 4, whatever it may be, there are set thresholds. Option 3 doesn't use thresholds, so it's a bit more arbitrary, but there's more flexibility. So for instance, if we know the case count within a particular school is rising, what we do is we go in and take a look. Okay, is it isolated to one classroom, or is it spread out among the school? What is the footprint of that positive case within that school? So what I mean by that is how many students have to quarantine as a result of that positive case? Is it few, or is there a large footprint, a lot of students have to quarantine? How is our staff impacted? So it's not that much different from how we've operated in the past when we've had like norovirus outbreaks or influenza outbreaks. Anytime we see those spikes in our schools, what we would do is consult with the health department and really figure out what the best way to move forward would be. So in those cases, they track our cases through their illness surveillance log, and that's something that we have for COVID as well. And that data is used to help drive those decisions, but it isn't attached to a particular rubric or threshold.
So there's an added layer of flexibility to option 3 versus option 2. Could that be accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears to me that this looks more at as your first square there indicates, looking more at the number of students and staff members who have either tested positive or are quarantined, rather than looking at the burden rate for everyone, adults and everyone within the school district boundaries.
Very true.
So this is more school-focused than community-focused, is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. So that's the third option. And then, of course, the fourth option is staying with the matrix that Mr. Kemmer explained at the beginning of this, is staying with that specific piece. So we felt those were really the 4 options to consider. We felt the third option had the most flexibility and allowed us to make decisions, in consultation with the health department, as was explained. So what I will do is turn it over to Drew.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Good evening. My part of the presentation is kind of walking you through the logistics of the timing of this decision and what outside of the academic realm is kind of needed to make this happen. Transportation, we're looking at about a week time frame to have Cabusson be able to bring back all of their drivers, the aids that they have, make sure we have it. They have the routes, but it's more the drivers, especially since we've been in a prolonged virtual Model 4, that a lot of their drivers were scaled back quite a bit. So some of them have either gone and gotten different jobs, or they're going and working for Cabusson over in a different district, and they have to get called back in. So we've got a few things in play with the bus side of the transportation. The biggest thing is the food service, especially because we don't have adequate storage facilities as it is in the district for food service to make sure that we can maintain the frozen and the refrigerated food that we would need in a quantity of what we need for the whole district being back in person. So to transition away from more of the frozen food service that we're in right now in the Model 3 to get to a hot service for all of the meals is really, we're looking at a 2-week ramp-up time, all told. We could go into a partial transition in about a week, but to do the full district's gonna take us 2 weeks to get all the frozen inventory out of, so we have room for the hot meals, plus ramp up and make sure that we have our staffing to be able to serve that many meals on a regular basis to all of the sites. Does anyone have questions on that part of the logistics? So then the other part of the logistics is the classroom setup and making sure that the staff in the buildings and the custodial crew in the buildings have time to make sure they're bringing things back. Obviously, as we've been in Model 3, we've tried to, in many of the buildings, we've tried to remove some of the desks and some of the furniture and try to put them in different parts, different areas of the buildings or different storage facilities. Trying to make sure that we have those all back is going to take some time. So this isn't a decision that we can really flip the switch from a complete Model 4, even a Model 3 hybrid, as we're trying to remain safe, into the Model 2. It's not a flip of the switch that can happen overnight. Especially in a district our size with 20 buildings, it's going to take a little time to get that to happen. So I'll turn it back to Dr. Gunlock. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Nehans.
Thank you, Priya.
Okay, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you for giving up your evening and listening to this. As part of this process, the administrators have been working on plans for quite some time, some more extensively than others, but probably since we've come back, they've been working on these plans. And so what we thought would be a great idea is to give some very granular and some representation of all levels of our district and all sides of our districts. To do that, I've asked 7 principals to comment and give the challenges that they're going to face, along with the solutions on how they're going to address those challenges to you tonight. Before we get started, we have representation from kindergarten, K all the way through high school. So representing at West High School, Mrs. Cole will be speaking. At the middle schools, Mr. Peterson from Merrill Middle School. From Traeger Middle School, Mrs. Pascarella. And then our elementary principals are going to be Mr. Johanknick from Oak Lawn Elementary, Mrs. Levy from Washington Elementary, and then Mrs. Martin from Oakwood Elementary, and then finally, Mrs. Schindel, our 4K principal. So I'm going to turn it over to them to show you some of the challenges that we're going to be facing and how we're going to solve those. So with that, let me turn it over. We're going to do this in two parts. First elementary and then secondary. So we'll start with the elementary first. So I'll turn it over to the team.
Is this live? Welcome.
Good evening. I'm Scott Johankner, principal at Oaklawn Elementary School, and on behalf of our building principals from early learning to elementary to middle to high school, we want to say thank you. Thank you to our school board, to our executive team, to our staffs at each of our buildings and throughout the district, to our students, families, and the community as a whole in Oshkosh. We want to thank the entire community for the continued support and positivity as we strive to do what is best for all of our students and employees during these challenging times. The administrators present in this room behind me and my side, as well as those social distancing down the hall, are excited and optimistic about welcoming all students back to school. The last week of teaching in person has been incredibly positive for the students and for our staff. As we look at the potential of welcoming our students back to Model 2, we are aware of the challenges and are prepared to address them with possible solutions. We know that flexibility is going to be important, as well as the careful consideration of the recommended protocols for health and our safety guidelines. No matter what obstacle we face, we are prepared to meet it. We will do our best to work as a team to problem solve, to keep our students and our staff safe, as we facilitate the growth and the development of each student. I'm going to pass it on over to Christy now, who is going to step into our first discussion of our challenges and our potential solutions.
So to get us started tonight, before we launch into what we see as our core challenges that we're facing at the elementary level, we really wanted to frame this conversation for you. And first and foremost, we see our responsibility in helping you make decisions for our students, in that we're supporting you and we're supporting our community and knowing what the challenges are and making decisions that are informed. If we're doing a good job, you should never be surprised. And so really this is just about bringing those forward to you so that you have an idea of what's happening in our schools on the ground, which is sometimes different than what we imagine it might be. So this just gives you a glimpse inside our buildings, inside of our classrooms, so that as we're having higher level conversation about the topic, we're really envisioning what that looks like in a classroom, in a hallway, in a lunchroom, etc. And just knowing that we're really solutions oriented and our continued commitment is to just work the problems. We have a variety of solutions to our core challenges that we have already brainstormed. We've been talking about these things, in some aspect or another since July. We also recognize that as we get kids into school and as we start living in our schools each and every day with full attendance, we'll realize that some of those solutions don't work as well as we thought they did, and we go back and we keep working on it, we keep problem solving, we keep reporting out and sharing what's going well and what we're still trying to problem solve. And so that's really what this is about, is just bringing those to your attention so that you feel like you have a better idea of what's happening in our schools.
All right, so can you all hear me okay from over here?
Commissioner, we'll have you come up to the microphone.
Sure.
For people at home.
Hello.
Thank you.
All right. So the first core challenge, we recognize that for students, for families, and for our staff, consistency is key. And that's been a message we've heard across all of those groups throughout since spring. So as we look at this, one of the core challenges we're going to face when we think about transitioning back to a Model 2 is that schools, grade levels, and classrooms may be required to transition between instructional models with minimal notice due to positive cases, unavailable staffing, and quarantine requirements. We're used to that living in Wisconsin. We're used to inclement weather days and figuring out a backup plan and a safety plan for a day at a time. But definitely we'd be looking at, when we're talking about quarantines, that's a much different scenario. So some solutions we have to that. First, we're going to be looking at every strategy available to us to leverage and mitigate the spread of COVID-19 within our schools. you'll hear my counterparts talk a little bit about the challenges that come in when you think about putting all of our students back in schools. But we're willing and committed to using whatever strategies we can. It's going to be incredibly important as a solution that as principals we're going to work with our families to help them prepare for the possibility of sudden shifts. Our nurses right now are taking the brunt of the surprise or the upset when that sudden shift happens, and that's in Model 3. And so, we know that anytime you bring more people in, that's a trade-off that we're making. There may be more of those situations. And so really trying to help them think through what will the emergency plan be, what will this look like, and coming up with those solutions ahead of time so we can try not to catch them off guard, but that is a very real thing that we're going to need to think about. The younger our students are, the harder that's going to be for families because childcare becomes an issue. But really making sure we can get out in front of those changes so that parents can start thinking through solutions. And communication being sent out to families as soon as possible to give as much lead time as we're able. Again, it still may be minimal. It may be a situation where we find out at 6 o'clock in the morning we have too many staff out and we're going to need to come up with plan C, D, E, F, or G, right? Or we find out that there's a case that has popped up. We're going to be calling families and now we need to quarantine groups of students. And so just making sure that as buildings and as leaders, we're getting that information out to families as quickly as we can. But sometimes we won't have much lead time in those scenarios. So really communication, pre-work on the front end, let's come up with some emergency backup plans and leveraging all the strategies we can in our school buildings to try to prevent that as much as possible.
The second core challenge that we know that teachers are going to face really applies to Model 3 and Model 2, but the impact is a little bit different when you have all of your students in attendance face-to-face, and you might have a few students who need to quarantine because of contact outside of school. And really that instructional challenge comes down to all of the pieces that are associated with balancing educating students in person who are live in front of you in your classroom, while simultaneously providing instructional opportunities for students who might be quarantined and at home. I know that that sounds simple when you think about just beam kids in and they can live stream the lesson and they can watch what's happening. I feel like if you actually watch a teacher try to do that, and it's true at the elementary, it's true at the secondary as well. It's a little like watching Go-Go Gadget try to do all of the things at the same time. Because what you have a teacher doing to optimize that experience for the students learning at home is that they are trying to simultaneously project themselves. Elementary instruction is very expressive. It's very dependent on students being able to see the teacher. It's also very dependent on students being able to see what's happening on the BenQ, and it's also dependent on them being able to see what's happening on the table. And so in a live classroom, that works very seamlessly because I can see all of those things happening at once. In order for a teacher to optimize that experience for students at home who are quarantining, they would have to be managing all of those pieces of the logistics. And what happens is that if you ask a teacher to do both of those things, one or the other or both suffers. And so if we ask them to prioritize the logistics of optimizing that instructional experience for kids at home, what ends up happening is that the actual quality of instruction goes down. And so if you ask teachers to focus on the instruction that's happening in the classroom, the logistics piece the quality starts to go down. And so you really are asking teachers to prioritize one over the other. And in a situation where we have teachers in classroom face-to-face with the majority of their students, I think that we can all agree that the most impactful experience is for that student to have the best possible instruction in the classroom on the days that he or she is there. And so that does provide some challenges then related to what are we providing for students that might be quarantined or learning from home. And how do we do that without breaking the backs of our teachers? Our teachers have done the unimaginable if we think about what we could have expected from them 12 months ago. But this is still an area where we're going to run into challenges. And so we have talked about live streaming class instruction or recording the live instruction as it's happening and providing that to students who aren't there. But we also have to recognize that's not going to be the same experience that students are getting in the classroom. So the other opportunity that we have is to provide some asynchronous learning activities. Asynchronous learning activities could be posted in Canvas. They could be third-party videos that teachers are using that are part of their curriculum packs. It could be providing some extra practice or application. It could be their math workbook that goes home. There's a number of options there. I just think that we need to recognize that it's not going to look the same for students that are at school versus students that may be learning from home. We also talked about buildings opting to assign a staff liaison to support families and students and help progress monitor for those students that are learning from home for a period of time. So recognizing that, again, the teacher is trying to manage all of their in-person learners. If that student gets stuck or if that student needs support during the day, their teacher is not going to be available to them because he or she will be with students. So we had talked about leveraging our pupil services staff, whether that means using our school counselors or using our social workers or a combination thereof to say this is the list of students that we have who are quarantined or isolated during the time. And just making sure that they have someone from school that's regularly checking in with them and that they can also reach out to during the day so that they can speak with a teacher or they can connect with a teacher anytime during the day, even if their classroom teacher is in the process of working with their other students.
I have a question.
Yeah.
2 questions. First question is on the bullet point, the first bullet point, if we have students who have to quarantine multiple times, how would, then obviously the second bullet point would help that.
Correct.
If we did have a liaison,
Yeah.
I'm concerned for, because I have children in the district and we've had quarantine because of different activities. And the quarantine right now is 10 days, if they're positive, and 14 days if you have contact. So those kids are out 14 days, and that could be happening off and on throughout the rest of the year if they're in 5 days a week.
Correct. Yep. And so that would really be up to each building to determine how they assign those liaisons, if they have the staffing availability and capacity to do that, and then how they would utilize that or leverage that to support families. So one way that you might do that is to make sure that if a student were to be quarantined on several separate occasions, that they're paired with the same staff liaison, so that relationship piece is there, the connection with the family is there, and then that person can really help to orchestrate what are the pieces that are available to that student, without overburdening the teacher, with them trying to
Right.
essentially do 2 jobs simultaneously at the same time.
And then the second bullet point, for equity, I don't know that I'm comfortable that buildings may opt into that. I mean, I think that would be something necessary for every school, and I know that, I guess I'm asking that we would look at that for every building, not an optional thing, because I think every building is gonna need it. And I'm not saying that's
Yeah.
that's, a
Reality.
higher.
I don't
just think that-
disagree at
yeah.
all. I can't speak for the capacity of my
Right,
colleagues
I get-
to
yeah,
assign
yeah,
somebody to do
yeah.
that for their students. But that is definitely something that we think would help
Okay.
connect that family to somebody at school who can be more responsive than the classroom teacher who's with students
Right,
all day.
okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
I'll switch places.
Thank you, Mrs. Schendel.
Sure. Okay, hello. So the next challenge we have is, obviously, if we're bringing back all the students into our building, there is no possible way to maintain 6 feet of social distancing. As we saw this evening, trying to bring everyone into this room, it's virtually impossible. So, rising to the challenge, we have a list of ideas of how to manage that. So we will try as much as possible to spread students out when and if we can. We will have the students wearing masks. I'm going to drop down to the third one for a minute because whenever they are in their classrooms, we will have students wearing masks and using the barriers that we have within the classrooms whenever possible. We're going to have, in a lot of schools, the kids are either eating in their classrooms or when they do go down to the cafeteria, they are using those partitions when they can't eat in their classrooms. We will be keeping the kids in their cohorts to mitigate that problem as well. And that will help in some of those situations. We are also going to keep the increased hand washing and sanitizing as much as we possibly can and wiping down surfaces as much as we possibly can as well. Nightly cleaning will continue as it has been throughout this whole time here during this school year. But in addition to that situation, obviously, there will be increased contact tracing going on whenever we have a situation. So we'll have more of a burden with that as we have more students that will need to be quarantined.
Thank you, Mrs. Martin.
I think the graphic on this image is one that says it all. Over the past 10 months, and if not 24 months and longer, we have had an increased need for substitutes. So if there's anyone in the Oshkosh community listening in that is free during the day or knows of someone, please pass that information along. I'll just put that plug in there for us. We are experiencing a higher demand for substitutes, and with our COVID experiences, it certainly has increased, that we have less subs available and an increasing need for subs. So as we look at how are we managing this, how are we managing up to take care of this need, we will continue to leverage paraprofessionals for classroom supervision. So if it's a situation where a teacher is quarantined, but they're healthy enough to continue working, or if they're not able to be in the building, but they can teach remotely, we have now been using that technology and able to do that. We still need, for safety reasons, an individual to be in the classroom with the students. A paraprofessional can do that. So if we have the availability of a paraprofessional to cover that, that is one way we are addressing that. Another way to address that, if we have a teacher who is not that classroom teacher, but their students are at specials, or they have an availability at the elementary level to step into that classroom again while the teacher may be teaching virtually from home, that's another way that we can have someone step in. Those staff members are able to time slip for their time. If they're covering during their lunch or another time, that would be their time, and they're giving that up to help cover that. That is a way that we can provide for that need. And then our instructional support teachers, literacy and math and other areas, have been stepping in to help cover for those short-term needs on a day-to-day basis, or even longer where needed. Of course, when we start to pull individuals from their work, then those areas are not provided as adequately as they normally would be. But again, in those circumstances, we are providing as best we can with whatever means possible to cover those areas. Additional strategies that we can look at considering, we have a block of number of substitutes available for personal days that staff can take each year, but we limit that by the day. We may need to look at limiting that even more, so we have less staff that are able to utilize that personal day, and we have more staffs available for individuals who are quarantined or who are ill in order to cover those sub needs. We can consider hiring a full-time substitute pool. We do know that there are school districts who have looked at that. I believe Oshkosh has discussed that. But that would allow us to secure subs, because there are substitutes who look at different school districts, not just covering one. And if they are employed in another school district, now they're not available for us to bring them to Oshkosh for that day or for long terms of time that they may be subbing. And then we do offer in the school district, if staff do not use their personal days, a payout. So if we incentivize and encourage them to utilize that, that's another where we're subtracting the need to have a substitute in that case. Any questions about our core challenge 4?
I seem to be the only one. On your slide 24, you guys had talked, the first bullet point was students will be spread out as much as possible, spaces provided, frequently less than 6 feet. What is frequently? I mean, we're talking about K through 12. No, we're talking K through 5.
Yeah.
Well, frequently. Sorry, Beth.
We can give this.
We're K.
Mm-hmm.
So is that the classrooms? Like, is that, if we're
Yeah.
putting all these kids in there and they're in one classroom so we're putting 27 kids in that one classroom, they can't stay 6 feet away?
They cannot. So we can use this visual as an example. That is the Oaklawn cafeteria. That is currently how we're able to space out in our model of
This
3.
is hybrid.
Yeah.
This is
This is
hybrid.
half the
If we
kids.
go to model 2, you would be putting a student in between each of those students at those tables. We would still be utilizing dividers in order to follow protocols and practices, but we get much closer together.
How are the nurses responding to the potential that they're going to have to do contact tracing because they got slammed really hard? And I haven't heard from any of the nurses. I'm just wondering if you guys, I know you're not nurses.
I know that Matt Kemmerer could speak more to that.
Matt, you want to come up?
Each of our buildings now has a designated contact tracer who has been trained in addition to our nursing staff.
Okay.
To provide some overflow and some support beyond our school nurses and our health assistants, but.
Okay.
So every school has a contact tracer. Are they keeping, well, we've only been in school, what, 4 days, well, 3 days. Do they feel like they can keep up right now at hybrid? And could they keep up if we were in 5 days a week with one contact tracer at every school? Can we, because I've heard of other districts who are really having a difficult time.
Yeah.
And they've said, you think that you have enough and you don't.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for asking about our nurses. They've done an amazing job throughout this entire year, and they really take on a huge burden with their entire role, not only contact tracing, but it is a challenge. It is overwhelming for them at times. It really ebbs and flows, but there are going to be times where it is going to be a real struggle, especially when we're 5 days a week, to try to keep up. I mean, what was, if we have a positive case, what would have been maybe 3 close contacts when we were hybrid is going to be 2 to 3 times that many.
Right.
So if you think about, for every close contact, you're making multiple phone calls, you're calculating out quarantine timelines. I mean, there's really a lot that goes into each time we quarantine a student. So not to mention that, anytime we have a student who's symptomatic, that means their siblings have to go home as well. So it's a difficult question to answer. I'm hoping that we have enough contact tracers. We're going to look to train more, but it really depends on the number of positive cases at any given point within a building.
Do we have a filter already that we know that these people could be contact tracers before we get to that level? Like, are we looking at training them already and moving them into that position?
So one of the challenging things is that every school has somebody they designated.
Right, okay.
But that's not their only role. So
Right,
it's
right.
also a secretary, or
Okay.
it's a paraprofessional. They have another job within that building that they might not be able to leave at any given moment and come help contact trace. So, I mean, we can train more people. The problem is, who is it going to be, and what are they going to be giving up in order to help contact trace?
And is the public health department going to pitch in at any point?
It really depends on what their capacity is. I know.
Well, it's been since March, so,
Right.
is there any potential for them to be able to help us? Because basically what happened in the fall is that our nurses got slammed and public health said, sorry. And so we're taking on an immense burden on behalf of them. So I'm wondering, now that we're 10 months into this, is there any inkling that there's going to be any support from them? Because a lot of this, by the way, a lot of what we're going to be doing, if we do option 3, we're going to be depending on the public health department to support us, and they can't support us now. So it's something that raises a flag for me.
Yeah,
and I know you're not the public health department.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not right now.
Yes.
And I certainly can't speak for them, but they were over capacity when we were having a surge in our area. But the thing you have to remember is, right now, their primary focus is on vaccine rollout. So whether or not they're able to allocate enough staff to help us contact trace, I honestly don't know. That's something we would have to look into, but they're really heading up that vaccination process for our area.
If it helps, Ms. Garner, we do know, what they have informed us is that they have hired a lot of additional contact tracers.
Okay.
So their staffing related to contact tracing this past March compared to where they are right now, they do have additional contact tracers, but we're not able to articulate an answer to your question as to how does that look in support for the school district beyond,
the nurse that typically would have been helping us,
Right.
knowing that we will have more availability for that one person,
Yeah.
but that may not address our true need all in all.
Well, I think we
Um,
have to assume
mhm.
that it's going to continue as it has been happening so far. Like, we can't assume that it's going to get better on
No,
that end.
but I wanted to at least provide you with the most recent information we had.
Thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Joe Hanknecht.
Come on back.
How many lunch periods do you have at Oaklawn School?
Currently at Oaklawn Elementary, we have 3 lunch periods, so we have 2 grade levels per lunch period. We begin before 11, and we finish up with, including the recess time, after 12:15, so it's over that hour and a half, 20-minute time span.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Yeah, I mean, certainly one other consideration would be, do we look at expanding outside the area? Do we look at adding increasing number of lunch periods? Each building is going to have to look at those as options and determine for their building what is the best option. Each of our school buildings is different. Some schools do have a cafeteria and a gym. Some do not. Their gym is their cafeteria, and so space is limited in terms of what we can do.
And
Thank
it
you.
would be just as, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry,
Dr.
I was
Rosen.
finished.
It would be just as crowded as classrooms.
That is the exact conversation that I've had with my staff and going through and talking with classroom teachers about the
Thank you.
pros
I'm
and cons.
processing it as we go along here.
Yeah,
Okay.
if they are in the classroom, they would be
Just
just
the
as
same.
close. And there
They
are
bring
other
them all back.
variables included in that in terms of having to walk their tray to the classroom, having to bring it back. The custodian now having to go to those 16 rooms to clean each room instead of the lunchroom.
Oh, yeah.
There are many other
And then waiting
logistics
to-
involved.
Got it,
Mhm.
okay.
In this case, specifically at Oaklawn, again, using this image as a reference, we will be able to split the tables further apart. So what you don't see from where this picture was taken, we have 6 circle tables. One of those tables we use as our nut and allergy table, nut-free and allergy-free table. We will be able to relocate that. We can take the first 2 tables on each side, 2 classes, move them all the way across the cafeteria. We'll gain 10 to 15 feet at least between classes that way.
Okay.
And then the next 2 tables, we move to where those were, and so we're leveraging greater space within the cafeteria, moving those classes apart, but still individual students within that cohort would be as close as they are as in the classroom.
Mr. Peschel, I thought I heard, or saw your hand up.
She got to my question.
Okay,
Oh,
If I may, though,
absolutely.
it's a different question, and it relates to that first bullet. Sorry, I don't, I mean, so we're acknowledging that social distancing is not a probable situation here. So, and I guess the context of that bullet, was it written in the sense of the existing student space as it is for a hybrid? Or is that written with the extent of, all right, we're bringing back in more tables, more, leisure, bean bags, whatever, that classroom, had set up for their atmosphere to learn in. So because that, to me, that it's a tight space already with the way it is in hybrid. We have to bring in, I would assume that we might have to bring in more tables, bring in more, can't think of the words right now.
Dividers.
Dividers. And so we're really acknowledging that there's less space with more stuff in there. And the atmosphere that the kids are typically would like to learn in is going to be non-existent in that way. Because usually our teachers are very flexible in their styles based on how the kids learn and everything. So this becomes a more rigid kind of learning experience as well. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Peschel, may I supplement that answer just a little bit by having Mr. Kamer come up and talk about how we use our barriers within the schools, because there are times for when it's needed versus times for when it is not. So for example, if the students are all facing the same direction, even if they're less than 6 feet apart, versus at tables and such, is that,
Okay.
if you don't mind, Mr.
Sure.
Kamer.
Yeah, so the barriers are just another mitigation strategy or tool that we have available to us. The key with our barriers is to use them in a smart and selective way. So if, as Dr. Cartwright mentioned, if we have students sitting at desks in rows where they're facing the back of another student, the use of a barrier probably isn't necessary. However, if a student is at a table facing another student in close quarters, that's where that extra layer of protection could be useful. And that's especially the case, for instance, in our lunchrooms where we have students who are unmasked and there isn't any type of protective barrier, I guess you would say, between them and others. It's something that allows them to eat and provides some level of protection. So I mean, they're not perfect, but it's another, like I said, tool that we have available to us.
Do we have enough, if we go to 5 days a week, do we have enough barriers currently?
I believe we do. And that's the thing, like I said, it's smart and strategic use. There are some instances where they're just not going to be beneficial, and they're actually probably just going to be a nuisance for some of our students and potentially get in the way of, seeing the board or other things like that. So as long as we're using them the way that they were intended to be used, I do believe that we have enough.
Anyone else right now? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Mrs. Levy and Mr. Kimmer.
Just gonna bleach your shirt.
Oh, we have the clicker here. Oh, perfect.
I love that you call it clicker. I love that you call it clicker.
Beautiful. Well, just speaking on behalf of the secondary principals as well, we want to express the same thing that Mr. Johanknick expressed earlier. Thank the board members just for allowing us to be here tonight and engage in this conversation and share a little bit of the experiences that we're having within our schools right now. We do know that we're going to talk a lot about some of the challenges with solutions as well. We're probably going to echo a lot of what you heard at the elementary, but it just really has probably more of a secondary flair to it, just with the uniqueness of the secondary schools. But we also would be remiss if we didn't talk about the benefits and start with the benefits of what in-person learning looks like for our kids as well. So I know we want to start there. I think I clicked yes, the right button. So obviously we can all accept, and we know that there are always increased opportunities at school in person 5 days a week with all of our kids. We know that that provides more structure and routine for our students, our families, and our community when we can get to those 5 days a week, that's for sure. Another piece of that is just the daily access for our students in regard to the instruction that they're receiving, the access to their teachers, school staff in order to support the academics, and also in bullet point 3 here, supporting their social and emotional well-being as well. There's greater access to resources when we have students in our building 5 days a week. And that is something that I think every principal would fight passionately about and agree with as well as we speak through some of this tonight. But we're not here to talk about all of that per se. We're also here to talk about what those experiences are. So we will jump forward. Cool.
Good evening, everyone. So again, as Ryan said, a lot of what you're hearing from us is going to be very similar to the elementary level, but there's definitely a different spin at the secondary, especially with this one, the limitations to social distancing. So again, in most circumstances, we aren't going to be able to
come even close to being 6 feet apart, and in fact, in some cases, we're going to have students that are probably only about a foot apart. That's the reality of our classrooms. Cafeterias, when we get 1,600 people in the hallway at West, I will tell you it is really crowded. It's like a herd of buffalo. We also have some very high enrollment classes when it gets to like our, band, orchestra, choir, some of our Phi-Ed classes that are, sharing gyms with more than one section in a gym. We can have 40 to 80 plus students in a space at one time. One example of this is in the West weight room. We have 3 sections of strength and conditioning, 28 kids per section, almost every single hour of the school day at West. So that you're talking about over 84 kids in the weight room at the same time. So it's just, again, something to be aware of. More students will obviously will have to quarantine if someone tests positive. That's pretty obvious when you put more kids in the building closer together. So again, solutions to this, obviously masks will continue to be required. We're going to try to maintain as much distance as possible in classrooms and cafeterias. Most of our schools have switched our hallway traffic patterns, so many of us have some one-way hallways just to try to keep everyone kind of facing the same direction and flowing in the same direction. I'm not sure if every school has added additional lunch shifts. I know at the high school we went from 2 to 4 additional, so we have doubled our lunch shifts in order to reduce the numbers in our cafeteria. But again, just like in Scott's example, very similar to what our cafeterias look like right now. So what you see in Scott's example, you double that. That's what we're going to have at the high school as well.
Yeah. How many kids are at lunch then? Like if you have 4 periods right now, how many kids would be at lunch together?
Right now, or when right now we have approximately 200 students, and we have at West we have 2 lunchrooms.
Okay.
I can't speak to North. I mean, they have fewer students, but their lunch spaces are smaller as well.
Right.
So we would go up to about 400 students a lunch period. And we do offer, students can leave campus for lunch. Typically at West, freshmen don't have open campus, but because they're spread out among all the lunch shifts, they do have open campus, although they typically don't leave quite as often. We found at the beginning of the year, a lot of the students left campus because it was nice and warm outside, and they could go outside and take off their masks and hang out with their friends. And now that it's winter, we have a lot more kids eating in the cafeteria. So.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
Oh, no.
I just messed it all up. I pushed the wrong thing.
Now you know why I celebrated the way.
I have
Awesome.
a question.
Which
if
button?
you need a buffer.
Okay, Mrs.
I don't know who might have the answer to this question, but do we have any data on how many quarantines resulted as of the first day back to virtual learning on Monday? Does anybody? We are tracking them though,
Yeah.
right?
It's on the dashboard, right?
It is on the dashboard, which gets updated on Mondays and Thursdays.
So there'd be
Thursday. So for last week, if you're looking at our COVID dashboard right now, it would have, because we would be within that quarantine period, it would have the most recent information since we started hybrid last week. So if you were asking specifically, so for example.
So Monday.
This past Monday, yesterday, we updated it. So if you were to look at West High School in particular, right as of Monday, we have 5 students who are COVID positive and 57 that had to quarantine.
Okay.
Does that help answer your
Yes,
question?
I think that is the very first day we went back to hybrid, right?
No, this would have been yesterday's data. So it would have been
right.
everything that would occurred
yeah, right.
last
Okay,
week.
sorry. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So 57 students quarantining for
Correct.
2 weeks. Okay.
For last weekend and this week, correct.
1 week.
1 week. 1 week. We were only school last week.
Right,
And
yeah.
yesterday we didn't have school, so 1 week.
Yeah, right, okay. Sorry, all the days are blurring together. I don't know why. This thing called a pandemic.
So these are just pictures in a classroom. You can see on the one side is hybrid, how the desks are spaced out. And then when we have all students back, you can see there's a little bit more space side to side, but then front and back a little bit less. Just a visual for you.
In addition, I don't think I have any classrooms with desks. So all of our classrooms at Traeger it's some sort of a table. We don't have any desks at Traeger at all. So that would create a different
Whole different
situation.
scenario for
And I
you.
didn't take any pictures of ours, so.
And we also have many classrooms at West that have tables as well. All of our math classrooms have tables. Our science rooms are like two-person tables. And then we have several other classrooms throughout that have tables, so. Can I talk about that?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, are you talking? Okay. So this picture just kind of shows a typical like classroom layout. So the first picture is hybrid. If you have 15 kids in the class, and let's say the number 4 student that's in orange tests positive for COVID, the other 4 students in yellow would have to quarantine. And remember that number 4 student has 6 to 7 classes a day. And not with number 1, 2, 6, and 7. Right. So, you take 4 times 6 or 7 classes a day. That's a lot of students that have to quarantine. And then, when we're 5 days a week, you look at that student number 7 in the orange. So that's 8 other kids that have to quarantine times 6 or 7 classes a day. So it's just exponentially, it's just, again, something to be aware of, that we're going to have significantly more students having to quarantine if a student was physically at school and tested positive.
Question. So who decided that we have to quarantine all the people around them? Is that coming from the health department, or like what is that based on, that everybody sitting next to?
I'm going to defer to Matt on that.
Like, are we required? I guess my question is, are we required to do that?
So that all comes from the DHS protocol that is a part of our district handbook, but essentially the requirements from DHS is that anybody who's within 6 feet of a COVID positive person for a cumulative total of 15 minutes or more within a 24-hour period would have to quarantine. So
Okay.
in these examples, the highlighted yellow individuals would essentially be within 6 feet of the person who's COVID positive.
Mr. Kamer, just for the general audience, DHS represents?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's Department of Health Services for the state of Wisconsin.
Okay.
Just a point of clarification, in the grouping where number 7 is the child who has tested positive, what if those surrounding students were tested and they were found to be negative? Would they have to quarantine for some period of time?
Yeah, so in terms of the close contact protocol, as a student, you would still have to quarantine for 14 days from the point of contact.
Okay, thank you.
I've asked that question myself, Barb, like 8 million times. She's so sick of me asking her this, I swear to God. I'm like, well, I don't get it. Doesn't make sense.
Makes no sense.
So what she explained to me is that the virus can shed for 14 days.
Okay.
So that's why it's that time frame.
Okay,
I
thank
believe
you.
she told me you're really contagious 2 days before you have symptoms, but then for whatever that
Days after.
time frame is that the virus can shed.
Okay,
And
thank you.
I hope that makes sense to you.
It does, thank you.
It does make
But
sense.
if not, I'll ask the question again. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just as you did.
So if they're in quarantine, and let's say number 12, 7, 8 days later tests positive, does that mean that 17's got to go into quarantine then too?
That's 16 and 18.
It depends. So it,
Will they be on quarantine, so maybe not?
So testing doesn't.
Wow.
no,
that
so,
sounds fun.
so when somebody tests positive, what we tend to do is we look at when they started to experience symptoms, and then we go back 48 hours from that point. There are instances where individuals are asymptomatic and they test positive as well. So in those instances, we look at when that test sample was taken and we go back 48 hours from there. So it really would depend on one of those two factors, either when they first started to experience symptoms or when their test sample was taken, and then that 48-hour look-back period whoever was a close contact within that 48-hour look-back period or beyond would be considered a close contact then and have to quarantine.
So if they test positive far into the quarantine time, then the rest of the students are okay because they weren't.
Right, potentially. Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a guess in that situation. So it's a best guess, best scenario in that situation. Okay.
If I may just maybe give a hard, concrete example, I think that may help explain this a little bit. So let's say today, let's say hypothetically, today is Wednesday, okay? And number 7 is test positive. So all the ones in yellow are now going to have to quarantine. And on Friday, number 12 ends up, being positive or has a positive test, right? And so at that point in time, then yes, we're within that 48 hours, right, of them going backwards. So that now does mean that 16, 17, and 18 would also now have to quarantine because we're within that 48 hours going.
Contact on Wednesday of somebody who tested positive 2
Well,
days
going
later.
backwards, right? But let's say number 17 doesn't become symptomatic or have a positive test until Tuesday next week. Then no, 21, 22, 23 would not have to quarantine at that point in time. I'm just trying to
So-
put it a little bit more in a concrete example.
After they are quarantined, are we requiring a test to make sure they don't have it when they come back or anything? No?
No.
Okay.
So there are instances where a negative test can shorten a quarantine timeline, but those are instances where we have a student who has symptoms and is sent home from school. If they were to go get a COVID test and test negative, that's an indication that it's not COVID, it's something else. So they would only have to stay out of school for whatever the required timeline would be for their symptoms.
Okay. Are we doing I'm sorry, Liz. Are we doing any temperature checks or, I don't know, do we have anything planned like that or?
So we've asked parents to monitor their children's temperature each day
Okay.
before they come to school. We ask the same thing of our staff.
Okay.
It's just another screening measure in addition to reviewing the questions that ask about symptoms related to COVID-19.
Okay.
So we hope that continues.
Okay. Well, my only comment was that I don't think that our schools are spreading COVID. We've been closed and COVID is spreading, so it's not our schools. But we know that students are coming to school with COVID and maybe not knowing it or maybe, for whatever reason. So, because that was on the first day. Number 7 on Monday had COVID and didn't know it. Like when we first started to go virtual, right? So then
No,
all
this
the
is
students.
hypothetical.
I know it is, yes. No, actually, I have a number 12, so. It's a true story, yeah. So, and he's been testing and everything too. So I think we need to make sure parents are aware that this is gonna be our policy because I feel like a lot of parents are gonna be really upset when their child is forced to quarantine for 14 days and you can't do sports and you can't do anything. And, there's going to be a lot of those. And I don't think, like I said, I don't think we're spreading it in our schools. I just think kids are getting it and don't know it, or they're coming to school anyway. So, I don't know what my point is. I guess I'm just trying to make sure that parents know that when your kids go back to school, you can expect them to be quarantined at any given time, and then maybe for multiple times.
Yep.
And Ms. Carlin, we're also trying to really double down on our communications about if your child is positive and you know your child is positive, they do not belong in school, period. Because the risk that you are exposing everyone else to at that school is tremendous.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Kimmer, and thank you, Mrs. Cole. This is like musical
I think
chairs.
this visual helps to signify the burden too, like on our nurses and our contact tracers. Like even in the short 3-week period at the start of the year when we were in hybrid, It was super overwhelming for our nursing staff, and at West, I have a nurse and 2 nurse assistants. We identified a paraprofessional to help with contact tracing, and the 3 principals and dean of students some days were making calls too. And the one thing about being in Model 3, the hybrid model, is that those kids aren't coming back the very next day because they have their virtual day. So we have that a little bit of value of, I mean, you want to get them called so that they're not going out in the community and spreading it. But they're not at least coming back to school the next day. So if you take 8 times 7 hours a day, that's 56 calls that we have to make for sure before those, and get contact with the parents for sure before those kids show up to school the next day. And so that's just, it's just a challenge. It's a reality. It was a challenge for the first 3 weeks of school for us to keep up with that. So that's just something to be aware of.
All right. So kind of along the same lines and building on that, it's talking more about the impact of our quarantine periods for sure. Not only the impact it has on our schools as we're working to contact trace and investigate all of these cases, but also the impact that it has on students. And as you can see in the slide deck, it talks very much about when we get to Model 2 and we bring students back full time, when a student is quarantined, now they're going to miss 10 days of instruction for a 14-day quarantine period. In the current hybrid model, they're missing out on essentially 4 days of in-person instruction. So just the time out of the classroom doubles for students as well. And it creates another challenge for us when we think about what at-home learning looks like when teachers are teaching 5 days a week, 5 classes a day at the secondary level. And kind of echoing what Christy had said earlier, what that instruction will look like is really problematic for us, and we're worried about that a little bit for sure. We know our teachers have been fantastic through all of this, and they have really done a lot of the heavy lifting, that's for sure. And we know they're going to continue to do that, and we're worried about what kind of pressure that is on our teaching staff for sure when they're trying to teach full-time 5 days a week, all of their periods in a day, and now trying to become virtual teachers as well, kind of as maybe as moonlighting as that, I guess is a good way of putting it. And that becomes a big time challenge for us for sure as we try to take care of our staff. Another impact of the quarantine periods, I don't know if you want to jump in.
So there's definitely an impact on our co-curriculars as well. As you know, we do have sports going, which is super exciting. So, but there's definitely impact with the extracurriculars with our athletes. You know, if they have to quarantine, not only are they missing school, but they're missing their sports. You know, we are getting requests from parents right now who want their kids to not come to school because, you know, the regional and state competitions are coming up, so now I want my student to quarantine and just be virtual for a few weeks until the state competition is over, because if they go to school and they get exposed to someone, then they can't compete at state. And so it just becomes a big challenge with the co-curriculars as well.
So question, what is the answer to that? Because I actually did have somebody ask me that exact thing. If my child stays home, will we offer a virtual option if they choose not to go back to school so they can participate in regionals or state or?
That's definitely one of the challenges that we have right now. There really isn't a virtual option. There's e-academy, and then there's whatever model we're in.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, parents are able to excuse their students for up to 10 days for any reason at all. And so if a parent wants to excuse their student from school for 10 days, again, right now, the kids are only in person 2 days a week. So that lasts a pretty long time right now. And then it's really, unfortunately, the learning's not the same. They're not going to, we can't recreate what's happening in person for the students who are quarantined at home, or the students whose parents are choosing not to send them to school. So our teachers do the very best that they can, whether it's having recordings or posting things in Canvas to try to help them keep up, but they're definitely not getting the same educational experience.
Thank you.
All right, and then just another one of those impacts of the quarantine periods is just the understanding the reality of what we're looking at. It's going to happen frequent. It's going to happen rapid. It could be individuals. It could be a classroom. It could be a grade level, depending on what level we're talking about and which schools we're talking about. And that becomes a challenge because it creates a certain level of gaps within the education for all of our students who are going to be in quarantine periods based on the guidelines that are followed. So as we try to spin this and look to some of the solutions for that, I know Ms. Cole hit on this. At the secondary level, all of the work right now is through our learning management system that is happening in the classroom. So students, families will have access to all of their work. But that lends itself to, is it the same type of education they're getting in front of their teachers? And that's the question that we have to wrestle with. But they will have that access for sure to all of the course materials. And I think, Ms. Carlin, you said this before, I'm not sure really, but I think there just has to be this increased understanding of the impact of the quarantine periods for sure. How they work, why they're required, and how that definitely impacts our students as well. And that's one of the solutions. It's just the awareness and the understanding piece within that. And then knowing that, the ability to encourage our families to have a backup plan. It could be frequent, it could be rapid. Know what we're going to do when those situations present themselves for sure, because we're trying to create those type of backup plans for the education that the students are experiencing as well. So that's about the impact of the quarantine periods. I don't know if there were more questions about that.
So what I'm understanding is, I'm just talking as I process this. So you're talking that the kids are in hybrid, and the quarantining is less because there's not as many kids. Numbers. So if they're in hybrid, but they can still do virtual at home on their virtual days, and they're just missing 2 days a week. If we go back 5 days a week, they're missing a full 2 weeks of classroom. And we're hoping, and we're going to work very hard though, at getting them their assignments and getting them, like what Mrs. Levy was talking about like getting them either, assignments in Canvas, or we're going to be giving them their a video to watch. So we will be trying to do that very, very, very hard. We'll put all energy into that. But the reality is if we have to quarantine, you're going to be missing a full 2 weeks of school versus 4 days of what you were saying, 10 days versus the 4. Please.
And I think this is an area where elementary and secondary look different.
Okay,
And we would not be following different protocols or procedures for how and when we quarantine students.
Okay.
I think the key difference is that, realistically speaking, if there's a close contact at school in an elementary classroom, more likely than not, that entire classroom of students is going to have to quarantine, which will allow an elementary classroom to transition to virtual learning, where the teacher would be virtual and the students would be virtual for that quarantine period, and they would essentially be in Model 4 for the duration.
For that classroom.
Yeah, that wouldn't apply if a student was quarantined because they had a close contact outside of school.
Right.
And had not brought it in.
Right.
So we would still be living in that kind of.
But not as much.
At times,
Right.
but I think the key difference is that our cohorts of students stay together all day. Secondary students are traveling from classroom to classroom.
That's a big difference. That's a lot more quarantine. Thank you. Okay, thanks.
I think one other important piece as well is just the difference at the secondary level of the curriculum and the course offerings that we have as well. So we're talking about trying to broadcast from a classroom so that students can at least know what's going on in the classroom. But that doesn't always work in every class at the high school or the middle school. A lot of our classes have become very hands-on. And I don't know how you replicate that either. And so that's one of the challenges that we're going to have to face as we're trying to figure out how to do this remotely for students who are in quarantine periods for a longer period of time.
I think it's also important to keep in mind, we've always worked with kids who've had to be at home. You get a kid who has the flu for a week, or they have a planned family vacation during school. Our teachers have always been super flexible and really amazing at working with kids and just helping them keep up and giving them what they can. I just think you have to understand the magnitude of the numbers of kids
Right.
that are going to be in this
At one
situation,
time.
and the fact that it's 14 days, so they'd be missing probably 10 school days.
Versus
and
5 or a
correct,
few. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
You
Mrs.
go.
Garland. Or Mr. Dr. Crush.
I think it's also important to understand that for some courses versus other courses, some courses will not lend itself to doing any type of live streaming. So for example, if it's a shop class, let me rephrase, auto mechanics, or maybe it's band or choir or those type of, or culinary arts. Those type of courses are absolutely hands-on type courses, and you just cannot replicate that through a live stream environment. But something, for example, like English 3 or a science, there are differences dependent upon the course itself. And so we have enough knowledge to where we'll be able to tell our parents pretty quick, hey, in these courses, we're not going to be able to do it. And that way we help parents understand what the expectations are, and helping them understand that there is a difference between the course offerings. Please jump in at any point in time.
I had a question on enforcing mask usage, because we've seen in our community that there are some people who do not wear masks because they have asthma or whatever reason, and we're going to be requiring them in our schools. So what happens if they refuse? What are the consequences?
Well, first of all, I just want to say our students have been absolutely amazing about wearing their masks and wearing them properly. We have very few issues with it. I think they're truly grateful to be in school. And
That's
so I just
awesome.
want to say that because our
That's awesome.
students really have been amazing. In the handbook, it's very, very clear that if there are any problems with kids refusing to wear masks or refusing to wear them properly, or they have to be told multiple times to put their masks on, that there can be disciplinary action up to suspension. And then if it becomes a repeated, refusal situation, up to expulsion. So we're taking it very seriously because we're talking about people's health.
And if a student doesn't have a mask or
We have
you have masks at the school, that's
Yep.
fantastic.
We
Great.
absolutely have masks right
Good.
at the doors that we can give them if they forget, or the other day we had a student who his strap on his mask broke, and so he came right away and asked for a mask. So yeah, we have masks for
Awesome.
students.
Thank you.
And I would echo what Aaron said about our kids being great. Like, I don't know how your student handled that, but we had a student that was somewhere and forgot it. They were emptying a tray, and they were covering with their hands trying to. So it's been very much ingrained in them that the masks are the way to go at school. So as we move on, two other challenges that we face, and these have been hot topics for sure over the course of the last 10 months, and it's just the impact of contact tracing for sure, and the substitute shortage again. And from the school's perspective, we have a very limited capacity to do these things, and I know that the discussion happened earlier a little bit about contact tracing, and I know that Matt had alluded to it, or Mr. Kemmerer had alluded to it. In many instances, the people that have been trained in order to do the contact tracing and to extend that capacity for us have other roles and responsibilities within the school. And like anything, when we shift people into a different job, their job tends to not be done to the fullest potential. And so there are some negative impacts there, which presents a challenge for us as well. And that same thing holds true in regard to our substitute teachers as well. Again, I cannot sing the praises of our teachers enough right now for all of the work that they've done. And the month or so that we've been in a hybrid model, at least at Merrill Middle School, I can speak to this. I have a group of teachers that will take every single opportunity to get in the classroom and sub every single time. And I have to, recognize them publicly because of the work that they do. But that has a negative impact on their job as well within the school where they're giving up every extra hour to be able to support the needs of the building as well. And so we have to figure out ways to increase those pools for sure, and not just simply shuffle some of our current resources from within the school to satisfy those needs as well. So when we go back to the solutions again, and I don't know if if we're able to give consideration to the idea of hiring full-time contact tracers for the district, that could just help assist in that. We've talked a lot about quarantine periods over the last half an hour, and that becomes a challenge when we're trying to do that. So I don't know if that would be an option, but that was one of the solutions that we had talked about. And then also trying to find permanent substitute teachers full-time and incentivize that for other people to come into the role in some capacity. And maybe it becomes a more consistent and stable employment for them as well. I think you're next.
I have the easiest one. So as you can see, just tonight, trying to wash all the time as everyone's coming up. So imagine we're going to be having to do that with 27 to 30 kids in each class. And there's no way the teachers will be able to get that done in the passing times. I think everyone has, well, you shortened your passing times, I think, but I think we have all extended our passing times to try to, or I will say I did at Trigger, to try to give them a little bit more time. But we also need them in the hallway to monitor the hallways, because generally if something's going to happen, that's typically the time it does happen. So what we continue to do, we're doing now, is trying to get students to wash and sanitize their hands as much as possible. I know we all have sanitation stations all over the school. We promote the use of that between classes, coming in and out from recess and stuff. And then we try to have our people service staff and other non-teaching staff in the halls between to help. And we talked about, one of the things we talked about, but we don't think it's possible, would be for kids to have their own wipes so that they could potentially wipe down. But I think there's a shortage of those, like nationwide. So that would have been great if we could have done that. So again, just reiterating what everyone said, our teachers have been amazing. I hope the whole community realizes what a fantastic job that they've done with everything, the subbing, and I haven't had any issues at Traeger where we couldn't get a class covered, because there's always a teacher to step up and do it. So I'm your closing argument, or not argument, I'm kidding. But no, we just really want to say how much we appreciate this opportunity to engage with you, and we look so forward to working with you, and we're really excited to bring kids back safely to Model 2. Just across the district, the whole community, we know how difficult this has been on everyone. So whatever we can do to help implement this smooth transition, please know that we are all 100% behind that. And we just, again, want to thank you for including us in this decision-making process and letting us bring just what we're facing to you so you have a better understanding. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Well, we are very grateful for your time, because we know that principals have been on duty since September, along with our EL teachers and our teachers for us in the special education program, our custodians, our secretaries, our principals. This has just been a Herculean effort. And a year ago, in August, I made a comment at a general meeting about heroes. We've had so many heroes. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little choked up. We have had so many heroes over this last year. And we've seen West High School staff in particular be heroes in a huge way. But since March of this year, we have had so many people throughout our school district, whether it's nurses or custodians or secretaries or paraprofessionals. I just can't say enough for everyone who has stepped up. And so many of these people step up every day in various ways that to the general public go unnoticed. But I know you principals take care of your staffs, and it's important to let them know how much we appreciate them. We don't see that here. Guests aren't really welcome in the buildings right now, so including school board members. But I look forward to the day when we can do that and personally thank these people ourselves, because this is just, as I said, been a Herculean effort.
Oh, yeah.
And to me, some of my greatest heroes are the people who work with our children. Those are our greatest resource, and as John Kennedy used to say, our greatest potential for the future. So we need to take care of the children. And in taking care of the children, we also need to take care of the staff. And so I want to thank all of you principals, because I know you talk among yourselves and you learn from your colleagues in other districts and what's worked and what challenges they've faced and what they've overcome. And I encourage you to continue to do that, because we do have success stories in other districts who have faced some of these challenges that you've posed. We can't think of every possible contingency, but we can certainly learn from other people. This morning, I had a conversation with someone I'd never met before, who happens to be both a school board member and a physician within this region. He works in a COVID clinic. And I asked him, how do you maintain 6 feet in your distance in your schools? And he said, that's one mitigating factor, but you have to look at all of them. It's the hand washing, it's the sanitizing, it's the proper wearing of the masks, it's the moving the kids quickly in the hallways, it's putting kids in cohort groups so you don't impact as many students. But there are success stories of schools in our state, in our region, who have managed to overcome some of these challenges. I don't say that this is easy. Please understand that. And it takes everybody. It takes a village. And so I have great hope. I've had great hope since the beginning that we can make this work moving together. Another thing this physician shared with me is that students are safer in schools. The incidence of positive cases tends to be lower in the schools than it is in the general population. And so when we look at the burden rate, in terms of the whole community, we've got a lot of adults who are contributing to that. And that we can't control, no more than we control the 5 and 6 students who pile into a car at lunch and go off together, or somebody who has a birthday party or a sleepover with 20 friends, which I heard about today, not in our district. But those kinds of things we can't control, but there are lots of things we can control. And I, as a former teacher, I'm truly convinced that the best place, the safest place for our students is in our schools, as long as we have these mitigating pieces in place, because we can address their academic needs so much better. We saw that in an earlier chart. We can address their social and emotional needs. So I'm not throwing out the science. I'm not throwing out the advice from the county health people or physicians, but I really think that we can make this work if we're smart and we use the data, we use the science, we take care of our teachers. Last week, the board approved 3 new policies, in case you're interested: 1630.02, 3430.02, and 4430.02. These are all related to the Family First Coronavirus Relief Act, which will allow our staff members to get paid if they need to quarantine or if they've tested positive, and they haven't used this before. The board chose to extend those benefits through the end of June. And I think that was a good first step. We've also had adjustments and modifications for staff who maybe have an immune issue or maybe they're pregnant, so that they are protected and they don't need to come into our classroom. So we have to take care of our staff, and I believe we put some things in place to do that, in addition to recruiting substitute teachers. So we do care about our staff. We want to take care of our staff so they can take care of the students. Or your board, I want to do that as a board member. I won't speak for the rest of the board. Thank you.
That's exactly what we all want, Barb, 100%.
And I hope tonight the principal group, and we speak on behalf of all the principals in the district, made it abundantly clear that we truly believe that we will be one of those success stories as well.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. I don't know if anybody has any ending comments you want to make. I know the board is probably.
There's still a couple more slides, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I don't know
Sorry.
who's going to close it out.
I got on a roll there. Apologize.
I know.
I'm sorry.
Well, I guess this is us. So we will, this was secondary. So just again, like we've already said, just the understanding and support of what, the safety protocols that we can implement and what our challenges are. Really, that was really important for all of us. That we might have lower attendance rates and potential withdrawals to homeschools or people wanting virtual, which is just something we're gonna have to, I guess, try to figure out. But I don't know how that will work.
What do you mean by that one? So understanding.
Well, if we talk about people, there are definitely going to be people that don't want to send their kids to school. They're going to ask us to give them a virtual option. And we have the E-Academy and we have coming to school.
And E-Academy virtual they're not even close.
There are other virtual schools in the Fox Valley. Appleton has Connections Academy, I think, and I'm sure there are other ones, but I don't know what they are.
Okay.
And then just the other thing, well, this has really already been talked about by Drew, but just having that enough time to prepare. And at the secondary level, it would be really advantageous to us if we started on a Thursday where they had that Wednesday to, okay, now everyone's gonna be here tomorrow, so switching between models for teachers is generally pretty difficult. It's just a lot to plan. I don't wanna say difficult, that's the wrong word. But it's a lot to plan.
Right.
So if they had that Wednesday when it's our virtual, all students are virtual, to prepare for that would be helpful. So that's only secondary though. I don't want to speak for elementary on that. So is there any other slides that we need to talk about? Sorry, I was like, wait a minute.
I'm
What's
quiet.
going on?
I think Mrs. Carlin has another.
I did. I just had one question. So what can we do as a school board, as school board members and citizens of this community, what can we do to support teachers in the school district right now? How can we support you?
I think working with district, the exec team and Dr. Cartwright on really clear, solid communication to families, which they do an amazing job of that. I don't want to say that's not, because they've done an amazing job. Katie's been amazing. But I think if we really lay everything out where it's a very clear if A, then B, if C, then D, if E, then F, I think that makes it easier for everyone. And just that we have to follow the guidelines. We don't have a choice on that. Because people get really mad when you call them and tell them their child has to quarantine.
Yes.
It's not a good conversation.
I feel that we've communicated this a lot, but I don't know that people are hearing it.
It still is unbelievable.
Yeah, that
it's really hard to say, no, you don't mean my kid.
Come to school.
Well, at this point, I'd rather call to tell them the kid's suspended. So that's an easier conversation.
And
so I've gotten,
I've
got a bunch of questions.
If I may, because what Ms. Pasquarella is talking about is a conversation we even had this morning, because we have a situation right now, without giving into privacy things, so I'm not going to say the school, but we have a situation right now where we have a family knowingly is looking to send their child to school.
Who's positive?
Who's positive. We just, and so we spoke about this as a principal group this morning and said, we will treat this as insubordination. Because we're backed into a corner. We can't isolate the child in the clinic, because we've got to keep that available for children who we suspect may have COVID, and for the unknown situations, not for a known situation. This is very serious. Whereas for children that may not have as much of a life-threatening tendency, for adults, you can't say the same. And as well as, we don't necessarily know all the different conditions that our students have at school. We know about the ones who may have health plans or maybe on 504 plans for accommodations and such. But you never know what comorbidities people may have. And so it's a risky endeavor, but that's a reality. That is something we discussed this morning. Am I right?
Yes, and I can tell you that matter's been resolved. So, yes, it is something we take very seriously. I think it'll be few and far between, but it is something, again, that all the principals have discussed that. But I think, again, the message is, I think there's a lot of obstacles that we've looked at. There's a lot of solutions that we can do. And I think Again, Barbara, I'm going to kind of put this back into kind of some closure here or wrap it up. Barbara, I'm going to dovetail exactly what you said, and something that I've told the principals as well, something I saw, came across, I believe, on some social media that I was watching, and it said, you can always spot the leaders, and you can always spot them in a crisis because they're the ones that are helping. And again, I think our teachers, our support staff, everyone has been helping, and our leaders here, I think, hope that you got that they're helping, they're problem solving, they're doing their absolute best, and we will make it work. That's our job. I want to go back to just a kind of a final thing, because you see the three options that we have in front of the board, kind of getting back to the board level here very quickly. Four, thank you. And why we're recommending 3. Dave, could you push up slide 10 real quickly? Sure. And this was implied, but I just want to make sure we're crystal clear why the flexibility is so important. So again, let's take the elementary just for a second. If there's a child positive and we have to close that classroom, and again, I'll pick on, for no particular reason, E-Cook. Well, 10% of that would be 23% if we used one of the other models. We could just simply close that classroom and continue to run school. And that's the flexibility that we could have. Otherwise, even if one classroom hits it and they have 27 kids in the class, we have to close the whole school. When we could have just closed that classroom because we know the contact tracing is isolated to that group. Again, it doesn't apply so much for the secondary, but at the elementary and other things, when we can contact trace and say, we know where it was and who was infected or possibly impacted, I shouldn't say infected, impacted, that gives us the flexibility. That's why we're recommending our option 3. That gives us the flexibility and let us decide, can we run school or can we not? And we'll always do the right thing to keep kids safe.
Thank you. I think Mrs. Carlin had something she wanted to add, and I know Mrs. Olmsted has been patiently
Kelly,
waiting.
go. You go first. I'm still stewing.
I have a lot. Central Office Administration recommends this. Does our principals recommend this option too?
Yes, they would like the flexibility.
Okay. Can we, and this is what I was, I had a note and then Mr. Peterson had brought it up. If we want to go back to 5 days a week, we need to have better contact tracing. We can't do this without better contact tracing. We just can't. So I would ask, or I want to know if we could look into full-time contact tracers or a person completely looking at that one position, not sharing that position, and if we don't have a clear commitment from the Department of Health that they're going to do that and take care of that and help us, we have to have that in the school, because if we don't have these contact tracers, it's going to blow up, right? We have to be able to do that. So are we looking at getting, it was very clear tonight with all the presentations that I heard, this is what I heard, that we don't have enough contact tracing in the schools to do this adequately if we go back to 5 days a week. That's how I'm understanding that, if I'm following correctly.
If I may, Ms. Olson,
Yep.
Mr. Nehans, if you'll just talk about maybe some of the, due to the ongoing conversation, some of the things that we spoke about yesterday related to, for example, like our substitute teachers, potential as far as like teacher assistants, which is a whole new concept for us.
Okay.
But even within that classification of teacher assistants, we could be looking at how do we cross that over to like contact tracers?
Okay.
So, Mr. Nehans.
Yeah, so Dr. Pinkston and I are looking into not only acting on what the different principal administrators were talking about and asking for the solutions of trying to hire on substitutes. And we are looking into that and trying to determine the number that would actually be out there that would be willing to go onto a contract. Many districts are struggling with that area to begin with. So I'm not sure how many we're going to get. A large part of our substitute pool are retirees, and you also get some parents that are in there in that pool that want the flexibility of not having to come every single day. But we are actively trying to recruit for that right now, as well as what Dr. Cartwright was saying, either utilizing some of our paraprofessionals or actually hiring some more, and also looking at the temp agencies and seeing what would potentially be an opportunity there to have some extra workforce from the temp agencies come in and fill a variety of different roles then within the buildings we have. And one of them would be the contact tracing.
So to kind of summarize, it's, we're looking to try to put, it would be temporary contracts, because it would be for the throughout the remainder of the school year, but putting some substitute teachers on contract, basically, so that means that they're getting benefits. So we're trying to incentivize it, to give them the benefits, the benefit package that goes with it, so that we can have a secured pool of substitute teachers that we make available to our schools. The other one that Mr. Nehan was talking about with temp agencies and such as that, there's a notion of like a teacher assistant kind of thing. So therefore, for that position, you need a high school diploma, but you don't need the criteria that like a substitute teacher has to have or a paraprofessional has to have. The criteria is different. Because, for example, a substitute teacher, you have to have at least an associate's degree. Mm-hmm. But a teacher assistant, because then we could cross-train them to do contact tracing. We could also have, so that way, if you wanted to, you have that flexibility of having a pool that's available for that. You also, for the situations where we are being very flexible, thank you, board, for our teachers who are able to continue to teach, but in a virtual environment because due to quarantining or something like that. When that happens, so the teacher is still responsible for the instruction, but you still have to have supervision in the classroom. And so this role could fill that need as well. And so that is what Mr. Nehan was referencing toward. Is there anything I missed on that?
No. On the subject of, excuse me, Kelly, on the subject of subs, I know that, as you mentioned, a lot of retired teachers normally would take those positions. And this year, the couple I talked to, because I'm closest to their age, said they were concerned about it because of COVID. And there was not a whole lot known about it back in September. Now that we're learning more about it, are some of those coming back? Are they still out?
At this point, maybe Dr. Pinkston can come because she does more with that. I'm not as knowledgeable on whether or not they're actively coming back right now.
And as she's coming up, please understand the notion that I just presented is something that's brand new and is due to the feedback that our principals are providing to us and recommendations that they're providing to us. So I want to acknowledge that. And I also want to say that we're at the infancy level of moving in that direction. But I wanted to at least let you know what we're discussing. So in other words, I don't have information about the temp agencies yet, those kind of things, or how many people are willing to be on a temporary contract, but in a contracted position as substitute teachers, because literally it's infancy, initial conversations.
Right. So we keep talking about substitute teachers, but I would like to know exactly for contact tracers. Mm-hmm. What are we doing to hire contact tracers at our schools so that there's enough when these kids, if we want to put these kids back 5 days a week in the next, few weeks, how, if it's hard enough now, and then we did hear some of the staff say that there was, in September, it was very difficult. How are we going to know, how are we ramped up so that we have contact tracers to be able to handle the amount of tracing that's going to have to be done? Because we know what's going to happen. So are we specifically, I know we're looking at substitute teachers, we're looking at supervisors to help in the classroom, but are we looking at specifically for contact tracers?
You mean, do we have it in the budget, and can we do it?
Yeah.
Do we have it in the budget? Can we hire full-time contact tracers? Do we have the ability to do that?
We are just receiving some initial information related to CARES Act 2. So Mr. Nehans, I'll let you explain that a little bit. those funds could potentially be used in order for us to hire contact tracers. I think it's extremely important for the board to understand, though, we are struggling in finding people to fill these positions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would imagine this one's easier though than subs.
Well, right, because
Okay.
the requirements are much
Right.
lower,
Yeah. So
right?
if we don't have a budget issue and the issue is actually finding bodies, okay.
But please, I would refer to Mr. Nihans related to the budget question, because he is your expert in that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if we're looking forward, if we're looking at tapping the second stimulus for the COVID, we definitely have money we're expecting to get, and they haven't completely released. They just said somewhere between 4 and 5 times what the first round was. So we're looking at somewhere between $4.5 to $6 million is what we're expecting.
Okay.
Now there is going to be a wide, just like in the first one, where we quickly went through that 1.4 million that we were allocated. We're going to quickly go through $5 million. It's not like that money, because they are extending that out over, as we phase out of this going into the next school year, there's a lot of extra costs that we don't even quite realize is going to happen yet. That is going to be the post-COVID cleanup, and we don't know what happens as we move forward on, and no one does, on what the sanitation has to continue to be, and what anything, the staffings and any of that is going to go down the road. So some of that money we definitely need to save and earmark for down the road. If the board controls and manages the positions we have, if you want 20 positions created or whatever that number is for contact tracing, that's a board decision. So if the board directs us that we need to actively seek out X number of contact tracers at this kind of a pay range, then we will have that directive then.
Can I ask a question that's
Go
related to
ahead.
this?
Yeah, go ahead.
If we have access to 4.5 to 6 million, can we, what I heard tonight, one of the main things that we need is support for our teachers. So yeah, subs are absolutely required, but what about the liaisons that, for the kids that get quarantined? Like, I would think that would be a higher, and tracing, what's so frustrating to me is that is not our responsibility. And so if we're getting 4.5, so these are two questions, sorry. The first thing is, if we get 4.5 to 6 million, I don't want to spend it on something that the public health department should be covering.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're getting it, aren't they getting a bump as well?
They should be, yes.
Okay. So.
Good point.
Okay, so that's.
Yep, all right.
I don't think there's a question there.
So that's where, that's where I'm frustrated also, is the fact that we want our kids in school, but we're not getting the support that we're supposed to be getting.
And
And
that's like
it
tiny
almost is like
compared-
impossible. You can't put these kids in school. We don't have contact tracing. That is like a nightmare.
Mhm.
How do you do that? How do you,
And we have other issues that are academically related.
that are
we-
our
we have to
responsibility?
cover.
Yeah.
So we're going to have, like we have 57 kids at West that are out right now.
Yep.
What's going to happen to them? How do we support them?
Mhm.
Liaisons was one idea. I'm sure we could come up with 10 more.
And that's our
if
responsibility.
we have access to those
Yeah.
funds to be able to make sure that our kids get what they need.
So that's one of those things.
Yeah.
Where do we spend the money for them? Do we
Well,
not? Do we
I would
ask
like-
the health department to really
I
stop?
think they
like-
need to do their part.
Yep.
I think we did such a good job with what we had, that the health department said, well, they're doing fine. We're going to just concentrate on the, over here.
But Matt did say that they're working
Yeah.
a lot on the vaccine stuff now. I think it needs to have a conversation with them.
That was
Go
my
ahead.
question, the vaccine. Do we have any idea? Because I know teachers are in Tier 1B. So does anybody have any idea of
Yeah,
when?
that's one of my biggest questions, yeah.
January 22nd is when we are anticipating further communication from the Department of Health Services. There was a subcommittee that was tasked with this to get input and feedback from the community related to that. The open comment period for that closed yesterday afternoon at 4 o'clock. As a school district, as your superintendent for the school district, I want to convey to you that we did, as well as I believe, if not every one of our principals, also did similar communication. And I think this is very important for people to understand, is that we requested it for all school district employees and our contracted services. In other words, bus drivers, bus monitors. We have some of our custodians that are contracted, but we were very intentional in stating it for all school district employees, because educators would not necessarily include your paraprofessionals who are working side by side and with the teacher in the classroom, or a custodian who is constantly our custodians, they're constantly interacting with their children, or our front office clerical, they're constantly interacting with our children. So that is why we took that stance, but from the Oshkosh area school district, again, we took a unified approach. Again, principals as well as from myself, and making sure that our voice was heard, and sending that communication to that committee.
Awesome.
The Wisconsin Association of School Boards also took a strong stance on that and sent out a strong message in support.
That's awesome. Well, as I was looking at the COVID dashboard, I noticed that to date, we have had 4,000 students that were quarantined. And I wrote down 696 at West, and that's cumulative since March, I assume.
No, September 1st.
That's in September. Okay. So that's kind of shocking to me when you look at 4,000, that's 4,000 phone calls that were made. That's 4,000 students that were, in quarantine, but it was virtual learning, so it didn't matter as much. Again, I guess I'm just sounding like a broken record at this point, but if we do choose to go back 5 days a week, and those numbers are without being 5 days a week and together. That's hybrid learning, that we have had 4,000 quarantines.
If I may, it's hybrid as well as virtual.
As well as virtual, okay.
And that would be your maximum number that you'd be looking at, because that's making an assumption that that's one child per household.
Yeah.
Say that last part again.
It's making an assumption that there's only one child per household. So let's say there's 2 children in a household, they're having a quarantine, that would be covered with one phone call.
Okay.
So I did have a question in there, actually. If going forward, do we know what the costs are from going virtual or hybrid back to, in person back, and then if we have a state mandate and we have to go back, virtual, do we have any idea of how, because it's got to be expensive. That's what I'm wondering. If we say we're going back 5 days a week in person, and then for whatever reason, we have another stay-at-home order, another wave, and then we go back to virtual, that's got to be expensive.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
The easier department to kind of quantify that is food service, just because they're more like a business, in that it's quantifiable. I don't have those numbers for you. I can certainly look up. It's
no,
obviously more
I'm just-
expensive for us. Again, part of what I was kind of going over earlier with the board on the logistics of getting food service back.
I know.
We've got primarily, even when we were in Model 4 and then shifting to Model 3, you're trying to go from a complete frozen inventory of what you're handing out in meals virtually to be eaten at home and microwaved, to now we're doing half of our meals hot and still giving frozen meals out at the same time. So you're storing and ordering 2 completely different kinds of products. And it also is worse on your labor on how am I trying to fix and manipulate these. You can't do assembly line quite as easy when you're doing 2 completely different sets. And then you're also then trying to shift to a full Model 2, which everyone's in person. So now you're doing nothing but hot menu items, which is the best overall, because now we can actually we only have one model that we're doing. So we can actually expand the menu, we expand our choices and our options. We're able to do more, but it also is very expensive to be going from frozen and fresh and then some of each. So you're limiting your menu on the hot to like 5 menu items for that you just keep rotating. I think we have like 8 to 10 menu items that just rotate every 2 weeks. So you don't get your bang for your buck. You're expected to take your commodities, which is a significant amount of money in foods, but we have to store them off-site because we don't have storage. So I believe we have like 6 or 7 storage facilities we're renting for food service around the county, not just in Oshkosh, around the county, to try to be able to manage all the different storage needs we have, which drastically go down again if we go to just the one model. So I can work up some numbers of what that would be, but just in that one department, it's.
I only brought it up because it was
Yeah.
eye-opening tonight. Like there's so much that goes into opening our schools again. And, that's just one of the many things that was eye-opening tonight about, what it costs and what it takes for the personnel and staff and bus drivers and cafeteria. I mean, it's a lot. So I don't need the concrete numbers. I think you explained it well enough, so thank you.
I can tell you just from March of last year when COVID hit until the end of that school year, that completely being shut down cost the food service department about $700,000.
Wow.
We were about $200,000 ahead of plan and in the surplus in March, but by the end of February. And the end of the year, we ended up with about a $500,000 deficit.
Wow.
So that is directly, and that's 2 months. So we've been in a situation for 8 months in this school year where we can't have participation driving. So it is very expensive for food.
Did you have anything else, Mrs. Carlin?
Nope, I'm good. Thank
Okay, I
you.
know Mrs. Olmsted is patiently waiting with her list,
Oh.
so we'll come back to Mrs. Olmsted.
I'm just, I had received quite a few, as I'm sure most of you guys did too, I'm hoping you all did too, not just me, received a lot of emails from staff and concerning of going back 5 days a week. Lots of examples of their classrooms and the sizes and how many kids and how to keep them apart and thanking us for what we have been doing and continuing on the same path. And please don't, I'm sure you guys have received a lot of those. So I'm struggling because I feel like we're taking, this is what's asking, is that we're going to move beyond the matrix, and we're going to be looking at, not by teacher choice, but by having to go back 5 days a week, we're going to be also having to look at the safety protocol handbook, because we cannot social distance. I want to be very clear to parents, because I also had some emails from parents stating that, are we actually, we have to be very, 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 very transparent that these students will not be social distanced in school if we put them in 5 days a week. We're having a hard time doing it hybrid. And we're looking at moving the matrix. And now we're going to look at the, safety protocols. Like, it's just all kind of swarming in my head right now with that. And, the principals did a great job, but I heard a lot of it loud and clear where this is what we have to do. We want the kids in school. But is that risk? You're taking a risk with doing, you're risking that physical distancing, and you're risking getting a disease in the teachers before they're vaccinated versus the risk of these kids academically and, socially and mentally, their health. That's just, it seems like a balancing act. And so I'm just trying to process it all. So those are just some thoughts that are running through my head right now.
Mr. Peschel and then Mrs. Szilagyi.
Sure. Kelly, we're kind of at the same point a little bit, because I think if you asked me last week, I was a little bit more comfortable discussing kids going back to school 5 days a week. This week, I'm a little bit less comfortable with it, and not just because of staff emailing us, but looking at it in how it impacts children. And we've all said it up here. We all sit up here. We all know that having kids back in school full time is what we absolutely want, and we know that's the best for kids. So the challenge with that full-on decision is, for me, is doing it too quickly. So so part of what's guiding me is I read a study from Princeton that came out in September that talked about school-age children being the transmitters of COVID. So, and so that study has kind of hit home with me in regards to what we're talking about right now in regards to putting kids back in. And so specifically, the study talked about how school-age children from elementary up to high school age children have the ability to transmit in group settings and familial settings, that there's a higher risk of transmission. It does support that there's not as high a risk of COVID within those age groups. So, and so the concern for me is that it's really only 3 months ago, where we were considered the highest in the country for a good solid 3 weeks. There's still other variants that are making its way into our state and into our community that will probably be as slow as COVID hit us like it did in September through November. And so my concern is by doing this, is doing it too quickly may set us back further again. And that's really my concern. It's about what's best for our students, what's best for our staff, because they're our front lines. They're the people that we support. Those are the people that we want to do the teaching, the supporting of the kids, cleaning of the schools, all of that stuff. And so, again, and I want my kids, and I want everyone else's kids to get the best education that they can get, which we all believe and support that that's in our schools. So, I like the hybrid because it's a slow moving process. We get to see it a little bit more real time of what it looks like. I mean, just 1 week showed us, that we have, we talked about 57 students in one high school, but across the district, it's 240 students that are already in quarantine and 13 positive cases. That's just 1 week of limited school. So, and I think it's safe to say that those numbers are going to increase, whether we're in hybrid or whether we're in 5 days a week. And so my suggestion is I know that the date that we're kind of talking about is the 8th of February. And some, I think, would think that that's more than enough time to be able to look at this and to make that decision. I don't think that is. So I think that's a month of data that'll show us, what things are like per school and everything. That gives staff the time to start preparing and thinking of those elements that they need in order to make their classrooms as safe as possible. But I think I'm really concerned about doing this quicker than what we have to. And I'm going to be honest with you, and I've said it before. I'm one of the people that wanted us to be in virtual in September, and so for me to be comfortable with hybrid is a big step. So I have concerns that come back to the cleanliness or the sanitation of rooms and spaces. That was such a strong focus in September. And my concern is that now with moving towards 5 days a week, that's not at the forefront of the health and the health component of our schools. The other side of that is that it's an airborne disease, particles that sit in the air. It's passed more that way. It's not passed as much on surfaces. But we also understand that it can pass through surfaces, and so the reduction of sanitation services within our schools is pretty paramount to me, because we're already indicating that we're not going to be able to do it between classes if we're at 5 days a week, and it's like we're doing normal school when it comes to sanitation. It's suggestive. I'm not saying that that's what you're saying, but from my perspective, it means that, okay, all rooms are going to be cleaned at the end of the day. We still might do our backpack spray and everything, but there's no none of those protocols during the day. Or is what I'm being understanding that are going to happen less. I understand that.
Clean the rooms between every single class. It's just going to be more of a process because there's 30, there's double the kids, so it's going to take more
Yeah.
time.
But I got to be honest with you, even the dad in me, what do I want you to spend your time doing in between those classes? Do I want you to be preparing to teach my kids, or do I want you to be spending all that little amount of time getting those desks and tables and surfaces clean? That's kind of where I'm coming from. I totally hear you. I know that all of the staff are going to do the best that they can do, but the reality is that do we have to put you in that situation? And that's where I'm coming from, is that do we have to right now put you in that situation in order to do that? Can we look back at it in another month and see what numbers are looking like, seeing if there's other protocols or other ideas that have been thought up and put into place, put into practice already? I am going to finish soon, so.
Is it okay if I just ask for clarification, just
Yeah.
in case, because I don't want people to walk away with a different assumption, if
Okay.
that's okay? Even in hybrid mode, our teachers are not necessarily preparing for their students, from that instructional perspective, because they are cleaning the desk in between the classes. And if I'm wrong, please correct me, but that I believe that is the understanding. So I just want to make sure there's a clarification that I don't want people to walk away with the impression that we're not cleaning
Correct.
currently.
That's my understanding, that that's taking place because they're supported in having that time and space to do that in between classes. I'm not suggesting that that's not being done in any way. So, the other concern is, I think, is also transportation. We have a lot of kids that use Cobuson transportation to get to school. And we know even at that time when they were busing kids to school, at the beginning of the school, there were some measures put in to reduce some social distancing. But now we're talking about sending everyone 5 days a week, full buses. And so, the question would be, are we going to add buses to create social distancing on the way to school and home? Or are we just gonna, pile them in on that? To me, this path leads to more questions that we were attempting to answer back in the fall, that now, because we've been gone for so long, we have to kind of think about how this transitions into what our goal is, and that's students first, getting them back to school 5 days a week, and providing the best education that our staff do. So.
Did you want to add something, Ms. Levy?
I was just going to point out that when we went through the PK5 and the secondary challenges, while you saw a lot of overlap between those two groups, there are areas where we are significantly different. And I just want that to not get lost in the couple of conversation when we're talking about cleaning between cohorts and all of the things that have to take place in between those passing times.
Yeah.
That really is an exclusively secondary challenge that looks very different than elementary if we were to have K5 or PK5 students 5 days a week in the classroom when they're really only mixing with their classmates. And that cleaning is happening all day long, every day, and that's really not COVID related. I'll tell you if you work with cleaning is happening.
Yeah.
And so there are some ways that we are very similar, and there are some ways that we are very different. And so considering 5 days a week for PK5 and secondary has some pretty significant differences.
I agree.
Sure.
They need to be looked at almost a little bit separate.
That wasn't an option, the splitting PK5 and 612 and having two different approaches.
Right.
Is there a reason that was not an option, or is it like, oh gosh, let's not put another one on the list? Did anybody think about it? We got one of the teachers that sent us an email, it was an option that she had brought up. Interesting. Or maybe she was high school.
Yeah, she brought up
Anyways, she talked about like elementary is a different operation.
Yep.
than secondary, and they do have cohorts.
Yeah.
But it wasn't something that we saw tonight.
Right.
I don't know how you guys feel about it. Is that like, please don't bring that up, Mrs. Garner?
Can I just comment on the PK end of things?
Sure.
So we're
Yeah.
a little bit different than elementary, just in that we do see multiple cohorts of students in a day, we have 2. So if we're looking at transitioning back 5 days a week, that cleaning piece needs to happen at least twice a day and
Okay.
while students are there. So that's another piece where we're similar, more similar to elementary, that we
Okay.
can cohort pretty well. We're a little dissimilar in that that's an extra, you've got that hour between classes, and we're trying to get everything ready, have lunch, and get things clean. So figuring
Okay.
out a plan, we'll figure out a plan to do it, but that is just a little bit.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know, seems like if they're maybe they could be, I don't know. I don't know if it's a good option, that's why I'm trying to get a read, but I think a lot of the, if anybody's back there.
Well, it's one of those things where you've just gotten a ton of information.
Yeah.
That's why I do believe that you're having another meeting next week. correct?
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
voting.
So.
Yeah, we're voting next week.
I wanna be
I mean,
ready.
It's totally normal to sit and, try to take that all in and then, I'm sure every one of you just needs time to think about it and process it. And go back to the slideshow, call up if you have questions. I'm glad that you're doing that you're giving each of yourselves time to think it through. And again, we just want you to know that we support and we're willing to do whatever we can to make it happen.
Yeah, I'm looking for a lot of guidance from you guys because I'm not in the
Yes.
building.
We
You
just
know?
gave you a whole bunch.
A ton of it, and so that's why, I'm wondering, how do you feel then about, a separate approach?
Well, that's what we were going to do at the beginning of the year.
Yes.
And so the elementary team was really prepared to start the school year in Model 2.
Okay.
So as we looked at this idea, really none of this was new to us. We were all kind of like, we're
Okay.
ready for this. Our buildings were set up for this. We're ready for this.
Okay.
So I don't want to speak for all
Yeah.
of them.
Thank you for
But
s-
I don't really think, whatever's best for the kids, we will make work.
Yeah.
We're
Okay.
One
ready.
thing that we would ask is that 4K5 stays together because we share specialists between buildings. And for a while, the board, we looked at 4K2 or 3.5. We don't want to do that. We want to stay together because of specialists.
Yeah, I think that would be very difficult if it was a
Yeah, I don't think-
3-5.
Yeah, the matrix had K2 through 3-5. So you're saying just keep it all?
You have, you have to because of specialists and sharing the specialists.
Well, and the reason is because they cohort. That's why we keep them together. We can't do that in secondary, that we know of. I don't know. Somebody's doing it somewhere in the country, but we're not. So that's why we would separate them.
We got a lot of emails. Excuse me, Mrs. Salaji has been waiting. She was to, she was to succeed Mr. Peschel, so I don't want her to lose track here. I want to give her voice.
But I would just add to a lot of the things that have already been said. Kelly, when you were talking about hearing from staff, I just wanted to jump in and say, we're hearing from parents too. It is not just
you're right.
staff.
Yes, you are. Yep.
We have gotten emails from parents today that say what Mr. Peschel said, please don't rush this. We appreciate that you have been in virtual and now in hybrid. So I just think it's important for us to acknowledge that our community is not all on the same page about this. I don't get the feeling that we as board members are all on the same page about this. Back in the fall when we voted, we didn't all vote in alignment. So this is an issue where there's never going to be a consensus of everyone agreeing to the solutions. I just felt that was important to put that out there, that it's not just a strategy. A lot of
From all over the country and all over Europe.
I know that.
Yeah.
That's a different area, and their health department did collect that data and said, hey, it didn't spread. Your students had it. They were all there 5 days a week, and it didn't spread. I wish we could have that data specific to our community.
Well, our humans are humans, so we're all the same.
Right? I agree with you. I do. Yeah. You're right, Allison. It is the same. Other data points that have been proven is that children get COVID at home
not at school, that they don't spread it as fast as adults, even though I guess they have higher viral loads, they don't actually spread it at the same rate that adults do. And I just feel like there's new information since the fall that we can't ignore when we make this decision a second time around, right? And I do just want to say, I greatly appreciate that we're not voting on this the same night that we get the information. That's one change from the fall, and I am thankful for that. I think that covers all my notes. That was kind of a hodgepodge of things from all over the night, but I've just been holding it all in.
Thank you, Mrs.
I would
Salaji.
like
I'm
to-
grateful for your patience. Thank you.
Thanks.
Can I pick what you just said, that we're getting teachers that are for it, teachers that are against going back, to, staff, or parents that are for both. And each side thinks that they have more, and it's not the case. I'm wondering, what if we did a survey? Like we did one in the fall, we did one in, what was it, August, July, about how comfortable, this seems to be a safety issue. So we've got staff that feel safe going back, staff that don't feel safe going back. We've got parents that are feeling safe putting their kids back to school, and then parents that don't. This is a community, this is a community, I believe, that this kind of needs to be a community issue and a community decision and a staff decision. And that's why we invited the principals tonight. We wanted to hear what you're thinking. We wanted to hear your opinions, and what you're going. So I guess it's just throwing it out there, because we did do it in the fall. So I'm wondering if that was something that anybody was thinking about doing again. Okay.
I have the same thought.
It's just an idea. I just want to, just like that we can just talk about maybe, I get that it would probably confuse things and make it harder again, but it's also, families aren't hearing the other side, and staff isn't hearing the other side, and we are trying to have these conversations with the principals here, and we're trying to have conversation with parents. If we're looking at what's best for students, I think staff and parents know what's best for their students. So do we want to hear from all of them? Or do we just do what we're, continue on the path that we're on, and we, have talked to the principals that are here today?
Would hearing from them change your mind? Would that impact? I mean, I guess I'm assuming you're
Because I'm struggling with this. Yeah, I don't know if it would or not. Honestly, I don't know. Because I don't know where I'm at. Yeah.
I think it would be helpful. That last survey was done end of July, first part of August. There's a lot that's changed since then. And I don't think it could hurt to do a survey.
There's one caveat.
Yes.
That is, if we do another survey,
Yep.
we have got to follow up. Because we did the last survey, we made everybody really mad.
Mm.
And then it was thrown back at us, which it should have been, and it continues to be thrown at us, because we didn't use it.
Yeah,
So
why did
be
we ask?
prepared.
Yeah.
If we go out there and it comes back and it's 50-50, you guys, think through, what are you gonna do now?
Right. Okay.
That's a good
Gotcha.
point.
Sorry.
No, that's
that's what I want to hear.
At. You did a better
No,
job.
that's what I want to hear. Like, this is just, I want to throw out all my ideas, but you're right. Yeah.
I was hoping to see an option tonight that would enable us to open the elementary schools, because we know that they're zeros, and that those kids are, it's harder for a second grader to learn to read online than it is for a West or North student to do math online. Virtual learning, I think in K-5 is much harder, but I don't really know. So I was hoping to see that option to keep it elementary open. Is that possible?
The
or-
board absolutely has the leisure to give us direction towards that. We just need to hear from you so that we know what to bring back to you for next week.
Okay.
For you to do formal action on.
But now that's
So, thank you. Yep, I'm with you. I don't want that responsibility. We gave that responsibility to administration. We did the matrix. I don't want, and how the rest of you feel, but that, I do not have that skill set. That is the administration, that is the principals, that is their choice. This was the matrix that we chose to use. This was the matrix that was brought to us. And then we had a committee relook at that matrix, and that matrix was brought to us. So we voted on that matrix. I don't know that I'd be like, nope, we're opening up, you know, them next week. That's not where I'm comfortable being. The matrix is where I'm comfortable
Right.
saying, what do we do with that matrix? If that makes sense.
No, I agree. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, I guess my question, I should rephrase my question then, is why didn't we present an option to just open elementary schools? Right?
That's my question.
That was Allison's question
Yeah.
last
Okay.
time. Right?
Sorry, I should let you answer it, but in the presentation, it did say we could do a phased approach, that we could start with the elementary schools
Okay.
and take longer, right? I don't know what
I
slide
didn't
number
see
was
that.
on, but it was in fine print
Okay,
underneath
yeah.
one of the
You're
bullet
right.
points.
You're right.
Should
But-
I go find it?
Is that a recommendation from administration?
Well,
It's on slide 14.
Okay.
And on slide 14, it was stating, logistics of returning to a five-day a week. On the second bullet, 1 week notice could be managed if we return to Model 2 to staggered. For example, elementary return 1 week with the rest of the district returning the following week. So there is flexibility in the recommendations that we are moving forward to you based off of our understanding of the conversation last week. It's not an all or none. We don't have to take an all or none. So if you went with option 3, for example, stop using the matrix and transition decisions to logistics for a return to a 5-day week, there's nothing, on or after February 8th. If you'll notice, we're not even giving you a solid date. There's nothing that would preclude us from starting on February 8th, PK through 5, and then consideration, maybe for the following week or 2 weeks after that for 6-12. I would recommend that we group it that way because of food services and our ability in order to ensure that we're able to provide, the appropriate meals for our students. But there's nothing here that would
Okay.
prevent that.
Okay.
We were trying to be as flexible in our options to make available to the board.
Thank you.
So our choices, because we're talking about, well, we wish we had different choices, but what we would be voting on next week and the recommendations of the admin is that we would choose option 3, which is to move beyond the matrix and start going towards a 5-day a week in-person learning for all students, and that could be staggered, but that would be option 3. Or option 4 is, Kelly, what I think you were saying, which is to stay in the current matrix, and that's what you were saying you liked. No, you don't like that. You were just saying that's what we did, and you don't like us giving the direction of how to change. Okay.
Yeah.
I
No.
misunderstood you
No,
then.
I'm not talking about what we're voting on and what, I'm not discussing at all about this. I'm discussing the fact that we voted to make the matrix. We are not voting, and we are not making a decision on whether or not to put kids back in school.
Yep.
We vote on the matrix does that for us. If we vote to go beyond the matrix, I still want administration to make those calls. I don't want any of that
Okay.
control. I don't think for me, I don't think it's appropriate that I make that call.
So like if we are going to stagger, we don't want Kelly saying, here's how I would do
Yeah.
it.
Right.
No, you don't want
Okay,
that.
thank you. I understand
Yes.
better now what you're
Yeah.
saying
Okay.
about what
Yes.
makes you uncomfortable with that.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with this. It
I
has to
agree,
do
Kelly.
with going back,
Mhm.
the whole time.
It's below the line, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
way below my line, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I did do some research, you guys know me. And I went through every single 22 schools, top to because we're 11, biggest school district in Wisconsin. So I went from the top to 22, we're in the middle. And I called some, because a lot of them don't, and wow, what a difference between their websites. And some of them were great, some of them weren't, some had what they were doing, some went back and forth, and I watched a lot of board meetings, and out of those 22 schools, and obviously Milwaukee and Madison are kind of on their own, like those don't even count, that numbers are way off on ours. They all are doing a staggered approach. None of them are going back full-time, all their kids. And actually what they're all doing right now is actually transitioning into hybrid. Only 3 of them are doing in person. out of those 22 schools. And I know there's been a lot of talk about comparing us to Winneconne and comparing us to Amro. Our schools those schools are a third of the size of our schools. So I don't think that it's a comparable comparison. We can't take West, that we have 1,500 to 1,600 kids, when you have like Winneconne, who has 520, 550 kids. So their entire school, what they have in class at full time, is what, Mrs. Cole has
In a lunch hour.
in a lunch hour. Right. So those are not apples to apples. So I can't, that's really difficult for me, and I'll admit that and then Amro, what has 350 in their high school, I think, around there. We can't compare. So I really want to compare to districts that are our size, that have the same amount of schools. The schools around us, Sheboygan has 23, Eau Claire has 23 schools. These are schools that have the same amount of school buildings than we do. So I think that's a better comparison. And a lot of them are in hybrid. A few are getting into person, and a lot of them are moving into reopening and looking at, and all of these have had meetings that we're having tonight in the past, 2 to 3 weeks. I think every district is starting to have these and starting to move forward. But all of them are going in phased approaches, starting with their younger kids going back into person. But a lot of them are hybrid. Only a few are actually going to in-person 5 days a week moving forward. So I definitely think that we would be like the leaders on putting our kids back in 5 days a week. And I could be so wrong, but I called some of these schools the past couple days, and I went online and looked, and I've looked at their news articles of what their district is doing, and I've watched board meetings. So we're not too off on what everybody's doing. Everybody's having these meetings, but I did want to say that they are doing the phased approach. They're not just throwing everybody in at the same time. None of them are doing that.
So
just
we're
wanted
most
to
of
share
them,
that.
you're saying most of them right now are phasing into hybrid.
Oh, yeah, actually, yes.
Like us. that's
Very
what
few
we're
are,
doing.
like Milwaukee and Madison are full virtual. Kenosha, I didn't get a read on. Racine thinking of hybrid, and Appleton's going into hybrid. Waukesha's opening up. Eau Claire's in hybrid. Janesville, their teachers are getting vaccinated.
Right?
What
I
is up
saw
with
that.
that?
Yes, as
So
I was
I just want to throw that out
Actually,
there.
that was next.
It was.
And that was next.
But then the governor came back, I think, on my understanding, I have not watched it for myself, I believe the governor may have come back on Sunday night and said, since everything was already
In place.
that he was going to authorize it, but I
I
did not watch
whatever
that myself.
Janesville did, I would like here.
Maybe
Yeah,
we should do
I
what
know.
Janesville did.
So, and Sheboygan's going hybrid January 1st, and Oshkosh hybrid, Sun Prairie's hybrid. So I went right down the line. West Allis and Middleton are all hybrid. So it seems to be what people are doing.
Excuse me,
Other
didn't
districts.
Appleton put their elementary students
Yeah, I thought they did.
face-to-face as of today?
Today.
With
Yeah, I
their
think today was the
secondary
first day.
Or their 512 going hybrid?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Are there elementary half days, right? Or did
I'm
they
sorry,
I
start
don't
that?
know. I didn't go into
Sorry,
that.
that
This
doesn't
took
matter.
hours already.
The point is, yes, the point is that we're not off-base
No.
districts
No,
our
we are
size.
not.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mhm.
And recognizing the challenges and differences between secondary and elementary.
Yeah, yes, yeah, that was.
Pre-K, I should say,
Mhm.
5.
And also, the new administration coming in, one of his goals for the first 100 days is to have all schools back in person. So the feds are going to.
That's what somebody else said, a few months ago? A different administration said it.
And also just to make sure the board is cognizant that this Thursday, the January 21st, the Senate is having a public hearing. The Committee on Human Services, Children and Families, and Senate Bill 6 relating to requirements for a school board to close a school building to in-person instruction for more than 14 consecutive days during the 2020-21 and 21-22 school years, and the school board requirement to offer full-time in-person option to all pupils. So,
I think some of this is going to be forced upon us.
Yeah. If we could, what a game changer if we knew when a vaccine was coming for the teachers.
That's a 2-month period, that's a 2 to 3 month.
I know, I know.
Even if it came this week, they wouldn't be covered. First of all, they wouldn't be covered until like March, because it takes the first one to the second one, it's like, what, 4 weeks or 6 weeks?
3 weeks for Moderna. And then for
Okay.
the other one?
So the first
If
one
I may, I
is- okay.
believe, I apologize,
Or did I get
I believe
Pfizer?
it's 4 weeks for the Pfizer, between the injections, and I believe it's 6 weeks for Moderna. Am I accurate on that, Mr. Gamer?
28 days for Moderna and 21 for Pfizer.
Oh, I heard about Pfizer.
Or we
And then
could just
how
ask
long
him.
after the second shot are you covered then?
Yeah, then when do you become immune?
So the thing to think about is there is some protection after the first shot.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
It takes about 2 weeks, but from what I've heard, it's about 92% effective from the first shot. After the second shot, there's another 2-week lag, and at that point, it's 95%.
Oh, okay.
So the second shot isn't a game changer, really?
Why are they doing the
First-
second shot
Why-
then if
yeah.
the first one is 92%? I don't think that's not what I heard, but I'm not a medical expert.
I'm not either.
We don't have one in the room.
If it will please the board, we will validate that coverage percentage, only because I know I've heard different percentages as well.
True,
But,
yeah.
so we'll validate that, not saying that Mr. Kamer's wrong. Please, I don't want to give that message.
Oh.
But we can validate that. And the good news is, with our partnership that we have been, as we've been talking about, we've been partnering with not only the health department, but our local health, hospitals and such. Whereas the health department was only able to have enough vaccines to cover our nurses and health room assistants and our therapists. The Aurora is going to be able to pick up the remainder of what we submitted as our 1A list, which are many of our special education, well, it's our special education teachers and paraprofessionals that work with significant medical condition children. So in other words, it's not going to be all special ed, it's not going to be all paraprofessionals, it's not going to be, someone that's with potentially like a diabetic child, but we're talking about significant needs, maybe a feeding tube, they may have a shunt, a brain shunt. So they're in charge of that child and providing medical services potentially for that child.
Okay.
And so that's why we viewed them as qualifying under the 1A category, again, because they're providing those services. And that's what the definition was for 1A group. And that started, Aurora started partnering with us, I believe, yesterday.
Is it going to be required for teachers to get the vaccine?
At this point in time, that we do not have any statute
Okay.
or any legal language that requires that from us, nor do we have any that we can lean on.
Okay.
We just highly encourage our staff, or let me rephrase, we highly encourage our staff to become informed.
Okay.
And so that they can make an informed decision for themselves.
Are there any other questions or comments at this time?
Oh,
Yes?
I would just like to invite stop laughing at me. Does any
I'm
of the
sorry, I
other
should have given you more wait
principals
time,
down the
sorry.
hall did any of them want to come say anything? They're all here being so supportive, and I just want to invite them, if any of them wanted to come share something. They came, and they've all sat, so I want to absolutely thank them and wonder if they want to come in.
Thank you, Mrs. Olmsted, I appreciate it.
Sure.
Are we gonna hammer out the details of a staggered start tonight? Or
No.
are we gonna do that next week?
I think that would be an administration decision.
Yeah.
Assuming we adopt
Right.
either option 3 or 4.
That's what I understood Kelly to be saying, that if
Right.
we adopt option 3 or 4,
Got it.
she still wants
Got it.
them to plan that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Did I
I'm glad it took,
capture that?
it
for-
took me a while to get there, and it took you longer.
Yeah.
We support a
back.
staggered, I support a staggered start. Maybe that's better?
All right, so what resolution would you like to see
Oh.
administration bring back to us next Monday?
one of
in a
our-
special meeting?
Thank you.
All right, Mrs. Anderson from Shapiro, welcome.
Thank you for welcoming. I know that you were talking about the vaccine.
Yes.
And just a quick statement about that. I have multiple staff that have come to me personally and said, we want our kids back. We'd love to have that vaccine first, because they're working on a
Okay.
sense of fear. And I know that my nurses and a few others, just that hope that it brought back to them and passion, and I want that for all my staff.
Yeah,
And
okay.
is there any way that we can continue to lobby to get that before we expect any staff to come back to a full group? You know, even just sitting amongst all of us, we have to think 24 to 27 in a classroom with that teacher.
Right, all day,
And
yep.
they truly, their hearts are there, our hearts are there, but when teachers are working with a sense of fear, we know that they can't do to their capacity and their ability. So yes, is there emotion behind this? Absolutely, because I'm speaking for the staff at my school. So,
Thank you.
yep, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Good point. Good point. Is there any
Mrs.
one else?
Anderson, yeah, did you know if there's anyone else that wanted to come over, down the hall?
I'll definitely ask.
Okay.
They're definitely listening, and there's lots of voices over there.
Okay, yeah.
They also want your time.
I'm sure. That's good. No, our time is good.
Maybe we should go down there.
Yeah. I'll go down, I'll report back.
More fun.
Okay.
Oh.
Well, they don't want to come talk, but they're just, again, super thankful for the opportunity, and, you know, they've appreciated listening to what you're saying, and we've been back in hybrid for a week, so taking some time to see how this rolls out is not the worst idea.
Mhm.
That's
Okay.
what's coming from that room.
Is
Okay?
that they just want a little bit more time in hybrid, maybe?
Maybe,
Okay.
maybe, just to
Okay.
see what happens. We agree about all of the different studies and different things.
Yep.
And I think you listen to the elementary principals say, having a staggered start is,
Right.
that's not a problem for any of us.
Yep.
And not that they don't necessarily throwing out the matrix. You know, we understand we're going to move away from it or make our own decisions, but they wanted that said too. There you go.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
Thank you
much.
so much. Thank you.
Okay, so what do we want administration to bring back to us next Monday then? How do we want to approach the resolution that we had planned to vote on?
Just bring back those 4 options? No? Okay, no?
The recommended option was,
Well, 3 or 4, they said.
Can we go back to that slide?
It's just one up.
Yeah.
Certainly. And just for clarification, of which I'm extremely grateful for Mr. Kamer researching very quickly, Moderna is roughly 80% effective after the first dose after it kicks in. So you get the shot, you still have to wait 2 weeks approximately for it to take effect.
Okay, thank you.
80%, and then after 4 weeks,
You get
and
another
then
one.
2 more
You
weeks.
get another one.
You get another one, and then it jumps up to 90-some%. Got it.
there's only 2 doses though, right?
Yeah. And they're like 3 to 4 weeks apart. Right? Both are, one's 3 weeks, one's 4
3
weeks.
to 4, yeah, 3 to
Yeah,
4.
okay.
28 days.
Mr. Peschel?
21 and 28, yeah.
Mr. Peschel?
Sure, so when trying to discern about option 3 or option 4, I guess my question is related to Dr. Cartwright and staff in regards to the existing matrix. Based on what the board has discussed in like the last 10 minutes about a staggered approach in regards to 5 days a week for elementary students and a hybrid option for secondary schools, do you feel that the current matrix provides you that opportunity to implement that?
It's a good question.
That's a very good question. I'm not sure we're prepared to answer that question for you this evening. If we continue with the current matrix, based on the trends that we're seeing right now, and we were to continue with 3 reporting periods of data, in order to do that, we did post an additional slide into our matrix data just to help with a visual for individuals to understand that. Looking at that information for high school, there has actually been, if we're looking at the burden rate, I can give you numbers just to kind of give you an idea. So the burden rate for high school has been increasing, has not been decreasing. December 24th, which is, all of this is on our website. December 24th, 2020, it was the burden rate for our students, grades K-12 that are in person, was 609. December 31st, 571, so a slight dip. January the 7th, 647, and then January 14th, 951. Now, middle school is a little bit more promising. It's a reverse trend. It's, but they're still, based off our current matrix, still meeting that threshold of hybrid mode, and has not crossed that threshold to get down into even a week 1 of Model 2 in-person instruction. So for middle school, at this point, so for middle school, December 24th, the burden rate was 607. December 31st was 276. January the 7th was 221. And January the 14th would be 166. So if we were to hypothetically play this out, following the trend that has been established, there would become a point to where middle school would hit the thresholds 3 weeks, potentially 3 weeks in a row, to return to or to transition into Model 2 in person 5 days a week, but high school would not.
Okay.
Not anytime, if this trend continues the way in which we're looking at those 4 data points.
Okay.
Because we have to have 3 weeks where it's under 100, correct? To get back to 5 days, and we heard those numbers, and they're like 900 and 600 and 200. We would have to
Never
have
gonna
3
get there.
weeks
Yeah.
of numbers that are below 100 to get back to 5 days a week, if we go with option 4.
Less than or equal to 100, that is correct.
Yeah.
Did you share with us the elementary numbers as well? For that same 4-week, I think it was a 4-week
Certainly.
period.
So for kindergarten through 2nd grade, December 24th, the burden rate was 333. December 31st, the burden rate was 0. January the 7th, 200. And January 14th is 200, which again, that's the indicators for, under our current matrix, to remain in virtual for grades 3 through 5. Your data, it's not necessarily a patterned data. December 24th is 575. Then it goes down, December 31st to 192. Then it goes down again on January the 7th. Now we would be back on track for 5 days a week. It was at 64, but last week it went back up. So January 14th, it went back up to 128.
So I have a question really quick. So did they say that they would be, at the elementary level, if there was a positive case, they would quarantine the whole classroom? Is that what we were
Potentially,
saying? Okay.
And then the teacher could teach that cohort.
Okay.
Ms. Levy?
Not by default, but in all likelihood, if we're using the criteria for contact tracing, because there is so much interaction among those students that are in the same room together all day, and the teacher and the parents that are working in that classroom, it would be unlikely that students would not be quarantined. It would be an outlying situation, like a student was absent for 2 days for unrelated reasons and have not come into contact. So we wouldn't be quarantining entire classrooms by default, but that's.
Yeah.
Like
So
most
what would a
likely what's going
second
to
grader
happen.
do when they were quarantined for 2 weeks?
I'm
Like,
sorry.
what would a second grader do at home for 2 weeks?
So are you asking if the entire class were to be quarantined?
Yeah, right, so-
We actually had that situation at Washington in September.
Okay.
We had a classroom that had to quarantine, that
was an isolated incident. Contact tracing indicated that no students in other cohorts in our building were impacted. And so that classroom of students and their teacher transitioned to Model 4 for that period of 14 days.
Okay.
And then they returned to school.
Okay,
It happened in
good to
Oakland,
know.
too.
Okay, thank
For
you.
one classroom.
Mr. Peschel, did I address your question?
Yes.
Thank you.
did. Thank you.
Andy wants to say something.
I'm sorry?
Andy's
Oh, I'm
raising
sorry.
his
I was looking at the board members and I didn't see any hands up.
Thank you. I've been asked just to clarify something from the principal's lens.
Great.
We were tasked with, the task that we were asked to do was, what would we have to do if we had to come back to 5-day?
Safely.
Safely. And our recommendation is up there, as we said, 3, okay? And that was our task, okay? So I think what's confusing to people right now as they listen to the discussion is saying, is that what we want to do?
Right.
And this is what we were tasked to do. And if we had to go to 5, then there's your answer. And I think you are discussing the other piece, which is, should we?
Right.
And I just want to make it clear to all the listening audience, because some of our principals are getting text and saying, wait a minute, where are we on this? And we were tasked with, what would it take to get to 5-day a week? And that was our presentation tonight. So I just want to clarify that for listening audience and others. So the principals asked me to just state that, so.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at, because I'm understanding it a little bit different. When I'm reading the Central Office Administration recommendation, I asked if that was the principal's recommendation also. So I guess maybe I didn't clarify. Are the principals and the staff comfortable going back 5 days a week?
I think you're going to get various responses to
Okay.
that. Again,
So they came to, okay.
we were tasked with, what would it take? And there's your, and what would we have to do? It will be very, to be very just straightforward here, it would be, that's why we asked to set the matrix aside, because doing 5 days a week would be very difficult with the current matrix, if not impossible.
Yeah.
So that's just a fact.
Getting to 5 days a week would be hard with the current matrix.
For the entire
It's
district.
impossible.
Yeah.
We'll never
I don't
get
believe
that.
it would ever happen with the current matrix. We would never see 5 days a week.
So for me, the summary of the proposed potential options here is maybe we do have to do this recommendation regardless of what we're going to do. Because if we keep the current matrix, from what you guys are saying, is we'll never be in 5 days a week. That's how some of you are understanding this. To me, that's a separate issue than, are our staff and our principals comfortable going back 5 days a week within the next couple weeks? Are they ready for that? Are they okay with that? They're fine with it, but they want to make sure that we know that they can't do,
Distancing.
social distancing? Or are they already game for it? Or are they saying, no, let's give us more time? Because now Ms. Pascarella just came and said they want more time and to go slower. Like, now I'm getting,
Dr. Jones, let's please allow our principal representatives to answer that
Yeah,
question.
principal reps, if you want to, Scott or anybody. Christie or
Ms. Pasquarello.
Jill.
You're going to get a variety of answers.
Okay.
A variety of principals who have different, I mean, we serve different populations of families and students.
Okay.
We have different populations of staff.
Okay.
That are in varying stages of their career. So I think it's only fair that each of us could only answer for our own building.
Okay.
I don't think you're going to get a unified answer from all of us if we're accurately representing our staff.
okay.
Yeah, you're going to be all over you're going to get different answers. Again,
Okay.
I think the message that I think that we need to just refocus on is that if you want to go to 5, as we said in the presentation, there are trade-offs.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
And you have to accept those trade-offs. And that's why we tried to be solution-based. Our principals did a great job of saying, here's the issue, here's how we could solve it.
Okay.
So, but again, I think, I will tell you, there is no solution that doesn't have a trade-off, one way or the other.
There's not a risk, one over the other, like I had said before.
Right.
I think if you go back to slide number 2, it clearly outlines the board request for this evening, which was to review the OASD instructional models matrix to safely return to in-person learning 5 days a week as soon as possible. As soon as possible is not defined as next week or in 2 weeks. It could be longer than that.
Right.
And it does, there's nothing implicit in there that says that all students have to go back at the same time.
same time.
So,
Okay.
as I read it, there is flexibility in there to have a staggered return to 5-day-a-week safely.
Okay, so how do we decide then as a board who has not been at the table to any of the Department of Health conversations? We've not been at the table with superintendents throughout the area. We've not been at the table with all of the information from the doctors and medical personnel that have been consulted. How on earth are the 7 of us going to figure out when is soon enough?
My belief was that we would choose one of the options, 3 or 4, as an answer to get to the board request, and then the responsibility would lie with administration, who have attended those meetings, who do confer with.
I can't choose between 3 or 4 because I don't know all the information. That's my struggle with this.
Okay.
I'm kind of sitting with Kelly going, I was hoping we would get a recommendation of what people thought was the best path forward.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now what I'm understanding
Yes.
is that they were tasked with saying, the board wants to know how you're going to get back to 5 days a week. So I realized the languaging, that isn't what I thought we had asked.
Me too.
So,
Agreed.
That's all.
I'm sorry, Mr. Peschel.
That's all right. So why not just do option 1? I mean, why don't we task Dr. Cartwright and staff to change the matrix so that it supports a transition to 5 days a week schooling?
That's what the current matrix does. Just
Say
not,
it again?
that's what the current matrix does. Just it's a
Well-
lot longer away.
Yes, we
Right.
all sat in this room last week
Yeah.
and
Okay.
talked about percentages. We all
Yep.
did this. We all agreed that we wanted our kids to be, to make this transition. So it sounds like we want to operate within a framework that sends that message that we support that, but we're not the people to create that framework to get there. So to me, I'm just not so sure that the recommendation that we prepared for here today is going to get us where we want to be. So if we still want to exist in the framework that the staff are the most prepared people to make this decision, maybe we have to, encourage staff to change that matrix to make it so that, we made the matrix. Dr. Cartwright and her team made the matrix through consulting with lots of other people. That matrix can be changed in order to do this.
From my understanding, though, in the matrix, where the numbers that we talked about last week with their burden rate, that comes directly from the health department.
We don't have to follow the burden rate either. We as a district can change our matrix. It's our matrix.
Isn't that what option 3 is?
That is option, no, that's moving beyond. See, I
So
laugh
not
every time I
using
say
the
the
matrix
matrix
at
now
all.
here because, but I guess I'm talking something different. If we want to move beyond the matrix, that's getting rid of the matrix.
Right.
That's saying we're done with it. We're gonna at least my understanding. But changing the matrix to still be representative of what's going on in our district, but also being supportive of getting to where we want to be is okay in my mind. So.
Right. I'm going back to what Allison, I agree with Allison, it's hard to make a decision between those two, because moving beyond the matrix, it says that we're gonna look at other logistical things, well, we weren't sure what logistical things.
Well, they shared the logistical things.
Okay.
Like, we've got, like, we now know if we say, we gotta do this, let's
Yep.
go.
Okay.
They have shown us, like, here are the 10,000 things we're gonna do.
But
We're gonna
how
make
do
it
we
happen.
decide?
Now it's back
Yeah.
to the 7 of us now having to make the decision, which is not what we agreed to do back in
Nope.
August.
Nope.
It may be what we agree to do tonight or next week or whatever. I'm feeling really vulnerable and exposed because I don't know all the darn facts, and
Right.
that's where I mean, I hate to say this after 3 hours of sitting in this room. I don't know more than, yeah.
I'm with you, Allison. I came here for clarity, and I feel like I'm leaving with confusion. I just, having witnessed the going back in hybrid mode and getting the phone call that your child was in direct contact, and I want parents to understand that you will not know what class it was in, you will not know who he was sitting with, you won't know what time of day it was, you will not know anything, and your child is out for 2 weeks. And I feel like if we do not communicate that to the community, we are going to have a lot of angry parents who don't think that their child was sitting next to someone who tested positive, who don't believe that their child should be quarantined for 2 weeks. And I just see a lot of frustration if we are not perfectly clear on that, because we have quarantined 4,000 students and teachers, and that is the right thing to do. That is definitely the right thing to do. So now my concern is if we're so close to the finish line, and if we rush opening, like Bob was saying, I mean, maybe this will not be a problem in 2 weeks because all our teachers will be vaccinated. That is my goal. So, I'm being more cautious now than I think I am coming into this meeting. Cautious and confused.
Okay, sure.
Go ahead, Jim.
I'm sorry,
Jim's not-
Mrs.
Just
Szilagyi, then Mr. Evans.
To remind everybody that we have a lot of angry parents out there have contacted us 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago.
Everything, yeah.
And,
Just be status quo.
It's whatever way you go, we're gonna get angry emails.
It's true.
Yeah. That is absolutely true. No matter what decision we make, there's going to be a portion of the community and staff who are upset with it. Allison, what I'm hearing from you and Kelly is that we don't want the kind of control or
I
power, or
don't.
whatever it is, that makes the decision about.
I think it's
the whole district.
irresponsible in many ways because we're not in the buildings.
Nope.
You think what?
I think it's actually irresponsible.
Yes.
We don't have all the information, we've not been privy to those conversations that have been going on since March, and none of us work in school buildings.
Yeah.
So you don't want me making that, you definitely don't want me making that decision. I don't want you 6 making that decision for my kid. You know what I mean?
So yes, but I wanted to speak to that and say that from my understanding, districts that are in person, that is how it's working. That it is,
The
I know
board
that one of
says
our
make it.
neighboring school districts, the district asked to be virtual and the school board said, no.
Okay.
Stay in person 5 days a week.
Boy, I hate for that to be true here.
So
Maybe it is.
I see this conversation that we're having as us trying to decide our role. Are we going to be the kind of school district that says you have all the information, you have the recommendations, and we're going to make the final shot? Or are we going to be the kind of school board that says you have all the information, you make the final shot, and we're going to support you?
Good.
And I feel
Yeah.
like we have to step up and do that. We
Okay.
have to trust that they're going to make the decision, and then it's our responsibility. If that's what we're saying. If we're saying we don't want to be the district that makes the decision, then we need to choose by default to be the district that supports the decision. If
Okay.
we want to be the district that makes the decision, then we make it, and everyone makes it work. I don't know if that's all making sense.
Oh my gosh.
It's 9:30 at night, but.
Yeah.
It does make sense to me.
Me too.
Thank you. I think to add on to what you've said, I think what you're saying then is that if we want the administration to ultimately make the decision, we would like to define the criteria, either stay with the current matrix or move beyond the matrix. Is that fair to add that on to what you've just said? Or one of the other 2 options for that matter?
I don't know that I fully understand.
Do you agree that this was our request?
Do I agree that our request was to review the instructional models to safely return to in-person learning 5 days a week? I believe that based on, I don't know how many of you went back home and rewatched our meeting last week. I did. I'm nerdy like that. I do believe that that was the impression that we gave, that we were asking them, I was saying, I shouldn't say we, I was saying that with the current matrix, our students will never be in 5 day a week.
Yes.
I don't see that happening.
Okay.
Others were saying, we see all those zeros, and I would have said this myself if others hadn't beat me to it. We see all these zeros on the dashboard, and it's hard to justify our schools not being in person when there's so many zeros.
Okay.
So we were saying those things.
Yep, you're right.
But this week, we didn't see just zeros as well.
There's still an
So
awful lot of
there's-
zeros.
There's still an awful lot of
I think now we
zeros,
what,
but.
have 16 kids that have it?
Correct, but there's also a lot of, all right, I'm just not going to argue that. So my point is that the information that we're seeing last week compared to this week is different. And it looks like it's going to be different for the next week as well. So I'm going to come back to the direction that we can provide is that we want our kids into school. We want to get our kids into school as quickly and as safely as possible to 5 days a week. I believe that the best option of doing that is changing the matrix. So I don't know how to do that because I'm not the administration. But I do know that if that's what we want, that may be our easiest way to get there. So I mean, other than us taking a vote and saying, you're going to do this. So I guess what I don't want to continue to hear myself talk about that. I would like to see if Dr. Cartwright or any of her staff are willing to address the request of the thought of changing the current matrix.
So Dr. Gunlock and I will respond to that. So we've given you the option 1 and option 2 change the matrix to accomplish your ultimate objective of trying to get students back into school in a safe manner. Ms. Gardner, the information that we receive, frankly speaking, is there's some that are saying it's safe, there's some that are saying it's not safe. There's no consistent message. There's, just as you found when you did your own research, just as we have found from people emailing us articles, there's no clear direction on this.
Okay.
I wish there were, because that would make my life,
Keeping it a secret?
executive team's life, our
Yeah.
principals' lives, so much easier.
Sure.
But there is no clear direction, clear picture on this. I think there's a danger that you need to be aware of. I think it's important because, and this is where I'm going to ask Dr. Gunlock to talk about the danger if we were to modify the matrix. So for example, if we were to modify the matrix, change the current matrix, in other words, keep with the burden rates, but move that high category down. And the concern that I know our principals raised and cabinet is also raised.
Well, I mean, it's an illusion. I mean,
Yes.
basically what you're doing is you're saying, get back to 5 days a week
Yeah.
and twist the matrix
Could
to
you,
make it
yeah,
work.
manipulate
so
the
why
data
do you
so
even
we
have
can
a
do it?
matrix if you're going to do that?
Right.
What you've really done is you've made a decision. Stick with the decision, and then that's why we suggested not taking the matrix and modifying it, because we felt that was probably, that's, in chemistry, we used to call that back calculating to get to the response that you had desired in the first place. It's not something that we want to do. We would rather be a little bit more upfront and say, okay, we're going to move beyond the matrix, we're going to get there, and that's why we presented what we presented here this evening. Because you need to realize, just as we all do, there is no right decision here. There are trade-offs, as Dr. Jones said, to each direction that we're planning on moving. Our number one goal will be to mitigate the risks as much as we humanly can. We're going to put procedures and policies in place to keep our kids and our staff as safe as we can. And as the situation changes, we're going to adjust as quickly as we can. But there's no way to say everything's going to work perfectly. There's also no consensus of opinion. I mean, if you were to ask different principals, they couldn't give you consensus of opinion even inside their own buildings, because everybody's a little different in where they are in terms of this risk. That's why we call this living in a gray zone.
Okay.
There is no black-white decision here. There is no, yes, this is the right way to go, this isn't. We kind of are in a spot where we have to, and that's really where your role comes in, because your job and the thing you are uniquely qualified to do is represent your constituents. And telling us what are the constituents in Oshkosh asking for, knowing full well you don't have 95% of them saying go one way or the other.
No.
If I might just add on to that, Allison, I just want to clarify again. As you heard the principal say, we've been working on this for months, and we are prepared. We can execute what we told you. And again, we gave you the trade-offs. That was our objective tonight, to say, here's the problem, here's the solutions. So we are prepared, to do that. And I think the other thing that you have to understand that you witnessed tonight is we have a very, very solid team. And if you say, go here, what they're telling you, or maybe not telling you, I'll tell you directly, is if you say go here, we'll go there. We'll execute it. We just need a direction, and we'll execute it. If you want to go over here, we'll go there. We'll execute it. Now, does that mean that we're all, we have our jobs to do, and we're going to execute our jobs? And does that mean I may have a difference of opinion? Yeah, but my job is to do what I've been tasked to do. And that's what they're trying to tell you in spades tonight, is saying, if this is your direction, we will carry it out. We will execute it. That doesn't necessarily mean I believe it, but this is the best way to do it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
but I don't.
they are very, very loyal people, and they're doing their best to try to work through the gray and try to be a beacon of hope, and they're going to have issues. They're going to have people mad at them any way we do this. But we just need, again, that's your decision, and I don't envy you. It's a very difficult decision. But once you set the direction,
Then
we will
they can move
execute
on.
whatever plan you want.
Okay.
Right, but I wanted their opinion on that direction.
And again, I think what they represent and we would represent
Right.
is, that won't be of much help, because you're going to get, I want them back,
Right.
I don't want them back, and everything in between.
Okay.
That's why, because this is a difficult, in our community, we can't build consensus. So you are obviously a perfect representation of our community. And this is tough stuff. But I just want to let you know, we're with you, and we'll be there. It's just, give us the marching orders.
So moving beyond the matrix option 3 gives the administration, the exec team and administration, the control they need to move where you guys believe is the best for our students in each school, what they can do.
Yes.
And that's what I was getting at last week. I didn't want to change the matrix. I didn't want to do any of that. Like, that's not, I was getting at the fact where when we have 0 students COVID at one school, can't they have more control over putting their kids back in their school? So I didn't want I was tired of looking at the whole district as a whole district. I thought we should break it down a little bit more, either by grades or by grade bands or by schools or by even elementary. And, I just wanted I wanted administration to have more control than just the matrix all the time. So I don't want to change the matrix. I don't want to create a new one. Either you stay with the matrix or we don't, and then the administration has, and this is what I'm thinking, the administration has that control and the trust of the community that you're going to do what's best for that particular school on that particular week or wherever it may be. That's where I was getting at last week, because it is hard when we look at all those schools and there's 0 and they're not there, because we're looking at all elementary schools. We have 14 of them. We can't do that. And that's just my opinion.
If I may, Ms.
Yep.
Olmsted, I think option 3, what that does is very similar to the conversation that you just had.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
And because with us maintaining the current matrix that we have, the likelihood of us being able to, even in a grade band,
Yeah.
because we move as a whole district in a grade band.
Mm-hmm.
And what our interpretation was that you were looking for something that maybe was more, even more flexible of that. And it's what we're doing already today, to be frank with you. Even in hybrid mode, if a school has a if we find that a classroom has a large enough population to where we need to close down that, or transition that classroom into virtual, we're doing that today. If we find that we have a grade level where that's occurring in a school, we're doing that today. If we find that an entire school, we're not able to staff the school, we're doing that today. We did that back in September. We had situations, I know Miss Levy's school, where as hard as she tried and coming up with as many creative solutions, and I want to give public credit to her on that, because there were some of the solutions she was coming up with was amazing. But it got to the point, because she started with classrooms, and it got to the point where we had to transition the school into virtual.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives you that flexibility. The difference is your default. Rather than your default at this point in time district-wide.
Right, yes.
It puts your default into 5-day-a-week modified in-person instruction.
Okay.
And then we continue to do what we're already doing as far as mitigating at a classroom, a potential grade or grades within a school or a school. Does that?
Yeah. I like the concept of the default. That's
Yeah.
a good way to put it.
I like that too.
Yeah, I'd like to suggest that they bring option 3 to the board next Wednesday, or Monday, I guess we meet. And if it gets voted down, then I guess we stay with option 4. I think that's our best option.
Would the board, for option 3, prefer that we give you a couple options related to that? In other words, one where we're looking at starting with elementary, 4K through grade 5 first on a set date, and then a recommendation for secondary maybe at a later date? Or would you prefer for this to be something for 4K through 12?
No, if we're gonna go with option 3, moving beyond the matrix, that means we're moving beyond the matrix. That's it, that we're just voting on not having the matrix.
Yeah.
Are we voting on, that's it. Like, to me, it's just, we're voting on, we're letting administration, the exec team, use other logistics besides the matrix to get us to move us between models.
I guess my question is more of,
Okay.
what's the effective date?
Oh, of when to stop using the matrix. Thank you.
Thank you.
Staggered or not, I think is what we're looking at.
Oh, I get what you're saying. Okay.
So we can stay
Yep.
within moving beyond it with a staggered start if that is.
Stay good start of getting rid of the matrix so that we can,
Correct.
that makes sense. Okay, thank you. Got
Thank
it.
you.
Okay.
And so
Now I
that's
understand.
what we
Yeah.
need a little bit of direction from the board as to,
What do you call it?
Yeah.
do you want us to bring both
Yeah.
approaches to the board on Monday, and then y'all discuss it and make an official vote? Or do you have a direction that you would like for us to explore in preparation for next week, tonight?
I would think it's staggered because we've only been hybrid 1 week. I think we need to look at more data than just 1 week.
I guess
Of being in hybrid?
a little confused. I thought if
Yeah.
we voted for option 3, those decisions would be incorporated in option 3 that you all would be making.
Yeah.
School by school, classroom by classroom.
That's how I took it.
Grade level by grade level, and we would do that across the board, all grade levels,
Same,
with an
yeah.
effective date. We're proposing February 8th or later.
Yeah, that's how I understood it.
And then on February 8th, if our
It's not
schools
ready,
are
it's not ready.
blowing up, we're not ready. And if they are, kind of, and we can look. Okay. I don't.
Okay, so tell me where I'm wrong now.
I have a
Yeah.
problem. So I think I've now heard loud and clear that they would like for us to provide some direction.
Okay.
And if we show up next Monday and we say, good luck, go ahead, move beyond it,
Okay.
we've not done our job and we've not
Okay.
given them the direction that they're asking for. So I actually
Okay.
think that we do have to give a date. I think somebody has to figure out the date, since we're the board, it might as well be. No, I'm kidding. I
Why
think
not?
we have to give them a date.
And I was going to point out about the staggering, that in their presentation, they pointed out that for food service, a staggered date is better, and for secondary ed, they said that a Thursday start is better, right? We all
Yes.
heard that.
Yes.
So I think one way to give direction.
Yes.
We can give direction and support them by
Yes.
saying, these are the things we heard you saying,
Yes.
and we support that direction,
Yes.
right?
And now they got their marching orders, whether they agree with it or not. Andy says everybody's marching in the same direction now. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
So they will look at data,
Yeah.
and they will use those data points, like the number of positive cases, the number of students in quarantine at a school or at like all the elementary schools, to say, we feel we can safely return students and staff to the elementary schools. And maybe they'll also say the high schools or secondary schools at that point, or maybe not. Maybe that'll be a staggered start. But I think we're giving them the authority and responsibility to look at the data, look at the science, and come up with an answer to that question: how do we safely return students and staff to in-person learning in the district?
If we're not using the matrix, then I would like a little glimpse of what data we are using then.
Okay.
Because that wasn't in, I'm still going back to that. I know it said that there's logistics that we're going to use, but what data are we going to be looking at if we're not using the matrix?
The data we will be looking at is how COVID-19 is impacting individual situations at the schools, okay?
Staff
it may
and
be-
students.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
So you're still using data.
Mhm.
We're just taking a different approach as to what is the impact on it. Because you may have 5 students who are COVID positive and 15 who are having to quarantine, and that may be one classroom.
Right, yeah. Yep.
You may have 5 students who are COVID positive, 3 are from the same family, the other one's from another, the other 2 are from another family.
Mhm.
They never even came to school.
Mhm.
And it has 0 impact
Gotcha.
in the classroom.
But you need an effective date to get started.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
we have to decide on that date,
Yep, so you can bring that. with
regardless of the
yep.
data.
Can it be effective immediately when we vote?
No.
No,
Oh,
please, we cannot do
No.
this.
Yes.
What I'm,
Now that I can give you a definitive answer. That's a hard no.
the soonest date
I've never
that
seen
we
a whole
would
room agree
recommend
so
is
fast.
February 8th.
Okay, so what I was saying, like effective immediately, giving you the authority to go forth and make these plans and
Sure.
start.
That would be next
picking the
Monday.
date. Yes.
But the soonest date that we would have enough runway in order to do food supply and those type of
Teachers.
things is February 8th. That is the soonest date.
Mhm. But we don't have to give that date.
Yes, yes.
We do.
We do.
I think that's the
I'm
one
so
thing we have to
confused.
give them.
Responsibility.
They're asking us, like, somebody stand up and take a stand on when we're gonna get these kids back to school. So they're asking us to do that. So on Monday, we have to decide if we're gonna do that, and if we're gonna say February 8th it is, we're gonna plant our flag here.
Unless the data shows that we shouldn't.
If the data shows that we
Right.
shouldn't, then we don't, no, the
That's
date
their
is still the
decision.
date.
I know, but that's
Nobody
still their
opens.
decision then.
On or after February 8th?
Yes, on or after
Yes.
February
Yes.
8th, they look at the data and then they decide where we should
If
be.
we get a massive
Yes.
spike, no one's opening.
Exactly,
Okay.
yes. So I don't want to
But-
keep saying we're starting, we're opening, we're opening.
So they'll
That's not
give
the
a
case.
recommendation.
We're looking at the data
So
and
many
making a
things.
choice.
In other words, something goes sideways across the entire district.
Right,
Because
right.
what this does is we're looking at this school-by-school situation.
Yep.
Kelly, if I can, because I think the word that's throwing us is data, okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would rather use the situation.
Okay.
So, because, again, the reason we're recommending option 3 is because if we lock into a number,
Yeah.
Right, okay, thank you.
That throws us. Of course, if we see an outbreak, we're going to close school
Right,
or schools
yes.
or the whole district.
Yes.
We're going to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Andy.
But
Yep.
it's going to be more operational to say, again, it's going to be pretty easy from our end somewhat. Well, here's an easy one. Half my staff is out in COVID protocol today. We can't run physical school. We're going to have to run it a different way.
Yep.
So, my principals are going to come to me in the morning and say, I don't have enough, I can't put it together.
Yep.
Because I have so many people out. But we're going to have daily stuff that you heard them say, well, somebody's going to sub for this person, then go sub for that person, and they make it work. They stitch it together, so to speak. And we can do that. So again, but we will use the data, and again, the data will be operationally, again, and some good common sense for us to say, again, if it's isolated to one classroom, we can run all the rest of the school because no one was exposed. If I use a data point, now I have to close the whole school because I hit a number.
Gotcha, okay, thank you.
And so that's Allison has it right. That's the flexibility we're seeking. And again, we let it be very clear right now. If we went to 5 days a week, I'm going to call it kind of when you have a power outage, little gray spots or blackouts, whatever you want to call the term. There's going to be certain schools that may not be up, but the rest of the district could be.
Right.
And so that's how we're going to do it. And just like the power company, we'll get back online at that school, and then we'll deal with it. We'll just juggle with it.
Perfect.
But that's the flexibility. But if you stick to a matrix, a number, now you've taken that decision-making out of our hands, and if there's 5 kids at the school, we're shutting it down
Yes,
according to the
and
matrix.
that's what we were getting at last week, Andy. Thank you. Yes.
Does that help?
Yep.
So data is the word, I think, either you're going to embrace it or leave it situational would be the term I would rather, it's less confusing to me.
I agree, thank you.
Well, and with the, I don't even know if I should say this. There's language in the current matrix. I may regret this. There's language in the current matrix that says Model 2 is with COVID precautions.
Right.
And I think that's the only point I want to make, that
Yeah.
the 5-day-a-week in school safely will require some COVID precautions or protocols, including the 3 Ws, washing your hands, wearing your mask properly, and watching your distance as much as possible. So it's not just going back to how our schools were on March 1st of last year. There are definitely protocols in place for everyone's protection.
Right, a lot, yeah.
Okay, thank you for
Yes,
tolerating.
that's a great summation, Dr. Herzog. I would completely agree. People understand. We
Thank
will be
you.
doing a lot of the protocols, but we'll have some trade-offs. But yes, all the ones you mentioned are the ones that are probably the 3 most effective things we can do to stop the spread. There they are.
So I don't understand why we have to lock into a date, though. Because a lot can happen between now and February 8th. And if we're locking into a date that they have to open schools by.
We're not
We're
locking
not.
into a date to open schools.
So
We're
February-
locking into a date that we're going to move beyond the matrix and let them make their decisions. And that could be going back 5 days a week, or it could be staying in other, I don't know, what are we going to call them? We're still calling them models, depending upon the situation with each school.
The
Okay.
default would be Model 2, but the situations may require for individual classrooms or schools to be Model 3, right?
Or 4.
Well said.
Or 4, yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Lodgy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the date just helps us establish when
Yeah.
do you want us to take that approach?
Everybody works to a deadline.
So the soonest we could do it is February 8th. I'm going to put out another idea. Do we, and this isn't a hard date, do we want to say when our teachers can get the vaccine? I see those as the 2 choices. They are saying they need at least 2 weeks, so from Monday,
We
2
don't
weeks
know
is
if they have
February 8th.
access, though.
Yes.
When do we find out?
I know, that's the problem. It wouldn't be a hard date.
And if not every teacher, this isn't English, but if not all the teachers get the vaccine,
or even the staff.
No, I'm saying like if there's people, let's say a third, because like a third of the US is saying they're gonna get the vaccine. Well, that doesn't help the spread.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what is the purpose, why would we wait for the vaccine? What is the purpose of waiting?
Because as we heard from one of the principals, that's what our staff wants, that they don't want to teach in fear and that they will feel more safe with the vaccine.
I've got some emails about the same thing.
We got emails about it, and then we heard a principal say it tonight, so I just wanted to throw that out there. In my head, I see it as we have two choices, the 2 weeks from Monday when we vote, which would be February 8th, or we could say when the vaccine starts to be administered to teachers. And you're right, they might not all take it, but just
Yeah.
that it would be available.
And we don't know the answer to that question
I
yet.
know.
Will we know it by Monday?
No.
Ugh.
I know.
The reason is because we are completely dependent on supply.
And by the way, we thought the supply was something, and now we know the supply is totally different than that. So
And
I'm
we s-
nervous that
we
our
s-
1Bs aren't going to get it.
We still don't know what that supply
know.
is
Ooh.
and what it looks like. Health Department took the approach they took with our 1A group because of their supply. Aurora took the approach that they took as a partner with us because of their access
Right.
to supply.
Right.
Every place is slightly different.
Okay.
So we cannot anticipate that.
Okay.
So that makes it too difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's too
because-
messy.
Yeah.
At least today.
Yeah.
And if somebody on my team or principals know something different, please let me know.
And there'll be changes of that coming up too from Washington.
Yep.
All right.
Need to see what they do.
Is there any other board member who has anything to add, or any other
Yeah, I just-
principal?
I'm
or-
just
I'm just kidding.
No,
I'm done.
I'm not gonna go away without saying is that I also have concerns with putting a specific date on there. And I understand that it's hard to get around not doing that in order to be able to move forward. You know, February 8th is literally, what is that, 2 weeks?
2 weeks from Monday.
So.
So 3 weeks.
Three
I'm
weeks.
sorry.
So that's still, I mean, that's still a short amount of time, and I struggle with doing it quicker than what we have to. And I know we're not telling you to do it quicker than what you have to, but that date can build anxiety. Just alone putting that date out there will build anxiety just for what, you know, what you just kind of did overview on it. So I'm just gonna put that out there. I'm not gonna suggest anything. I'm just voicing it, that the
Yep.
date is still a challenge for me.
Yep.
My goal still hasn't changed. I want kids in school as soon as
Yep.
safely possible for that. And I, again, support our staff in order to get there, to doing that, to
Yep.
getting us there.
And that's exactly where I'm coming from too. It takes as long as it takes to safely open the schools, and our teachers will let us know how much time they need, and we will respect however much time they need to get it open safely. I don't want it to be rushed and stressful. That's my only concern with the date as well.
Can we ask?
If I may,
Mrs. Szilagyi also wanted to weigh in.
I'm sorry.
I think that no date also adds anxiety.
A
As
lot.
a teacher,
Sure.
you have
No,
to.
I agree.
And that's what
Yes.
we've
I
been.
agree.
They want a date.
They want a
We
date.
don't want to give it, but they
Okay.
want one.
They
It's
want
our
one.
responsibility.
Look at all those heads.
I
Oh my
wanna
gosh.
give you a date.
They're all like.
And you guys made me feel better.
You said exactly what I was sitting here thinking. The level of anxiety
Yep.
among my staff every day is palpable because they feel like that transition is so taxing on them. And there are so many moving pieces that are required of every single person that works in all of our buildings that every day feels a little like waiting for the other shoe to drop when they just don't know
Okay.
what's coming, when it's coming, what it might look like. I'm not saying that has to,
No,
the
we-
reason you make one decision or the other, but making no decision is not relieving any
Yes.
stress.
We
So
we
that
owe
you
it
know.
to you to
Good to
pick
know.
a date, I
That's
think.
not leadership.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. We're
Right,
in
yeah.
this position, it's our
Yep.
responsibility, even if it makes us uncomfortable.
Okay. Fair enough.
Mr. Peschel?
Sure, so
I mean, just acknowledging that is great. But the reality is that we can still give direction of saying, even if we were to say the 8th, we could put, the 15th in there of February, and that would be, considered a month's time to allow staff and principals to build up the rapport that they need to be able to get the schools open. So, and again, I'm going to come back to how I stated my first comments earlier tonight. I don't want to rush into it. I want to give the time that's due. So if we're going to put, if we're going to put a date on it, let's have the date be out a little bit longer than the 8th, because it'll provide more time for staff to prepare. It'll provide more time for parents to prepare. Some will not be happy with that, but some will. We've already indicated that we're unsure about doing a survey in order to gather this information to help guide our decision. I think creating a month creates a good balance of preparation for everyone across the district. So 2 weeks, 3 weeks time, I think, is, in my mind, is a short time. So.
Well, administration, why did you guys put in here on slide 11, February 8th? Was there a reason for February 8th?
That is
Let's ask that.
Yes, that is because we were projecting out for the board to make some type of decision next week.
Okay.
And then from that
So
point.
it's 2 weeks out for
2 weeks
busing
out
everything
for
else.
everything, coordinating everything else. Also with the understanding that the 15th, which is a Monday, is a student holiday. Because that is the day where we do professional development, and
Yeah.
also having the understanding that Monday this week was a holiday.
Yep. Oh, okay.
Oh, so if they started the 8th, they'd have 5 days, and then they'd have a holiday. Is it a staff development, professional development?
It is.
The 15th, and then a 4
It's
days?
President's Day,
Secondary, though,
yes.
was asking to start on a Thursday, though.
Yes,
Let's remember
they
that.
are. Yeah.
They don't want to start on a Monday.
So it would be like the 8th and the 11th.
But again, they don't have to start in the same week.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and we're talking about.
All
staggering
we're
them, too.
saying, the date is what tells us that we're getting rid of the matrix.
Yes.
We're not telling anybody that they have to shove all the kids in the building that day.
Correct.
So let's be
Got it.
really clear.
Yes.
They've asked us for a date to back over the matrix with our car.
Yep.
Let's do it. Okay? And then they now have some sense of like their own
Whatever they wanna
destiny.
do.
They have
Yep.
some control.
Yep. I agree.
That's all they're asking for.
Got it.
We're not going to decide that, they will. We're just
Yeah.
saying, this is the date that we're,
So it's not going to happen before February 8th or
and
February.
it's not happening before, it might be the 9th,
Might be the
but it's not
9th.
going to be.
That's good.
I can
All
live
right.
with that.
Are
can live
we,
with that,
are we
too.
now clear
Yes.
on what this resolution will look like next week? I believe it will say something to the effect that we will be voting on option 3 to move beyond the matrix and provide the administration the flexibility to implement option 3 after February, on or after
starting, yeah.
February, fill in the blank, 8th, 15th, whatever you want.
I'd like Allison's language about backing up over with your
I want
car.
that.
I want that, okay, I want that in the car,
We'll
okay.
use my car.
Okay. All right, is there anyone else on the board who wishes to make any comments at this time? Anyone from the principal corps or the central office team? Again, I just want to thank all of you
Yes.
for your
Yes.
time
So
and your
much.
efforts tonight and your patience. You are appreciated, your staffs are appreciated, and I believe we can make continue to make good things happen for our children as we look to get everyone safely back into our schools. So thank you.
Thank you guys so much for coming.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right. That was-
Point of order.
Uh-oh.
Yes.
Is there we missed one agenda item, request for future agenda items?
Oh, thank you. Are there any requests for future agenda items?
Calm down, Allison. You made us skip.
Okay, any future agenda items? Any announcements? I think I just gave an announcement. All right, please call the roll.
Szilagyi? Aye. Harlan?
Aye.
Evans?
Aye.
Garner?
Aye.
Herzog?
Aye.
Olmsted?
Aye.
Peschel?
Aye.
And who placed the second on the motion?
I did.
Hey, my son texted me that the roads are slick, so.
Ooh, yeah, I bet.
Motion carried. Meeting adjourned.
That's